Hey everyone. Welcome back for the third and final part of Hero from Another World. If you have enjoyed this story so far, please consider leaving a like and subscribe. Anyways, enjoy. Chapter 7. Naruto reappeared not in the sterile HPSC office, but on the balcony of Mirko's penthouse, the cool night era welcome relief from the suffocating pressure of the president's office. He found Mirko leaning against the railing, a half-empty bottle of something expensive in her hand, her gaze fixed on the spot where he had vanished. She didn't seem surprised to see him. "So," she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "How was your meeting with the Wicked Witch of the West Wing?" "Productive," Naruto replied, walking to stand beside her. "She offered me a new job." "Let me guess," Mirko said, taking a long drink from the bottle. "Top secret missions, a fancy title, and a collar so tight you can't breathe without her permission." "She called it a handler," he confirmed. "Said I was going to be her scalpel." Mirko let out a short, barking laugh that was devoid of any humor. "Of course she did. Those desk jockey cowards wouldn't know a hero from a trained dog. They see power, and all they can think about is how to put it on a leash." She turned to him, her red eyes blazing in the city lights. "What did you tell her?" "I told her no," Naruto said simply. A slow, predatory grin spread across Mirko's face. It was a look of pure, unadulterated pride. "Good," she purred. "I was hoping you'd say that. Would have been a real pain to have to kick my partner's ass for selling out." She offered him the bottle. He took it, taking a small sip. The liquid burned, a pleasant warmth spreading through his chest. "They're not going to let it go, you know," she warned, her tone turning serious. "They can't force you, not with your popularity and All Might in your corner. But they'll try to control you indirectly. They'll bury you in red tape, assign you low-level missions to keep you out of the spotlight, maybe even try to prop up Endeavor as a safer number one." "Let them try," Naruto said, his voice calm. "They're playing chess. I'm playing a different game." He handed the bottle back to her. "They think the biggest threat is Shigaraki. They're wrong." "Oh?" she asked, intrigued. "And who's the real boogeyman, then?" "The one who's pulling his strings," Naruto replied, his gaze distant. "The one who gave All Might that scar. He's in a cage now, locked away in Tartarus. But a king in a prison is still a king. His plans are already in motion, and his followers are still out there. That's the real threat." Mirko was silent for a moment, processing the weight of his words. This wasn't just about the League of Villains anymore. This was about the secret war that had been fought in the shadows for generations. And Naruto, somehow, was already a part of it. "Well then," she said, her grin returning, fiercer than ever. "Sounds like we've got our work cut out for us." She nudged his shoulder with her own. "Good thing I like a challenge." He just smiled, a silent understanding passing between them. They were no longer just partners. They were allies in a war no one else knew was coming. Naruto's defiance of the HPSC sent ripples through the hero world's shadowed corridors. The president, furious but politically hamstrung, couldn't move against him directly. Instead, she began a subtle campaign. The media, once obsessed with Narumi, was now flooded with stories praising Endeavor's recent string of high-profile arrests. The narrative was slowly, carefully being shifted. Shinobi was the powerful but reckless rookie, Endeavor was the seasoned, reliable veteran. Naruto paid it no mind. His focus was on UA specifically, it was on a small, white-haired girl with a single horn. His days fell into a new routine. Mornings were spent with Mirko, a whirlwind of high-stakes patrols and brutal, exhilarating training sessions. But his afternoons were spent in a quiet, specialized playroom that UA had built within the Alliance Heights dormitory. Eri was a ghost. She rarely spoke, her large red eyes filled with a fear that was heartbreaking. She would flinch at loud noises and sudden movements. But she never flinched from Naruto. "Hey, Eri," he said, walking into the room. Aizawa was there, observing from a corner. Naruto held out a candy apple, a treat he brought for her every day. She looked at the apple, then at him, and for the first time, a tiny, hesitant smile touched her lips. She took it from his hand, her small fingers brushing against his. There was no flash of light, no surge of her volatile quirk. With him, she was just a little girl. I saw you on the television," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You were flying." "That was my partner," Naruto said, sitting on the floor a few feet away from her. "She's the cool one. I'm just the babysitter." Eri took a small bite of the candy apple. Are you going to leave, too?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Like the others?" Naruto's heart ached. He recognized the fear of abandonment, the deep-seated terror of being left alone. "No," he said, his voice soft but firm, a promise as unbreakable as any he had ever made. "I'm not going anywhere. I've got your back. Always." From the corner, Aizawa watched, a rare, almost imperceptible softening in his tired eyes. The boy was a monster on the battlefield, an enigma to the world, but here, in this room, he was something else entirely. He was a protector. Meanwhile, in a dark, undisclosed location, the League of Villains was licking its wounds. Tomura Shigaraki stood before a massive, wall-sized monitor, from which a single, distorted voice spoke. "Your failure was disappointing, Tomura," the voice of All for One rasped from his prison cell, his communication line still inexplicably open. "But not without its uses. We have learned a great deal. That kid. Shinobi. He's not normal, sensei," Shigaraki whined, scratching his neck furiously. "He broke the Nomu. He broke the rules. It's not fair." "Fairness is a luxury of the powerful," the voice replied. "And we, my boy, are about to become much more powerful." The screen flickered, showing an image of a massive, hulking man with a scarred face and a strange, tube-like apparatus on his back. "The doctor has been hard at work. The high-end Nomus are nearly ready. But to control them, you need to grow. You need to release the power that is sleeping within you." "But how, sensei?" Shigaraki asked, his voice a mixture of desperation and childish excitement. "You will face a trial," All for One's voice boomed. "You will face an army. You will face the Meta Liberation Army and their leader, Redestro. You will either conquer them and take their power for your own, or you will be destroyed." A wide, unhinged grin spread across Shigaraki's face. Destruction. That was a language he understood. The game was about to get a whole lot bigger. The age of Shinobi was a quiet one, on the surface. The HPSC's media campaign was relentless, plastering Endeavor's face over every heroic victory, no matter how minor. The public, hungry for a clear and simple symbol, began to accept the narrative. The number 2 hero was the workhorse, the ever-present pillar of flame, while the number 1 was a ghost, a myth who appeared only when the world was ending. Naruto couldn't have been happier. The decrease in public scrutiny gave him the one thing he valued more than any ranking: freedom. His afternoons with Eri became the anchor of his new life. The sterile playroom was slowly transformed. Naruto, with the help of a few clones and a generous budget from UA, had turned it into a small, whimsical forest, with soft, moss-like carpets and walls painted with towering trees. "Okay, Eri," Naruto said one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on the moss. "I'm going to teach you a game. It's called Cat's Cradle." He produced a simple loop of string. Eri watched, her red eyes wide with a cautious curiosity, as his long, deft fingers weaved the string into a complex pattern. "See?" he said, holding up the finished shape. "It's a cup and saucer. Now, you try." He gently guided her small, trembling hands, showing her how to loop the string, how to create the patterns. Her first few attempts were clumsy, but he was endlessly patient. For the first time, she was using her hands not to cower or defend, but to create something, however small. After a few minutes, she managed a simple shape. A tiny, proud smile, the first genuine one he had ever seen from her, lit up her face. "I did it." "You did," he said, his own smile warm and genuine. "You're a natural." Aizawa, watching from the doorway, felt a strange sense of peace. He had seen Naruto dismantle armies and terrify villains. But this quiet, patient kindness. This was a different kind of strength. A kind the world desperately needed. Later that evening, Naruto stood on his usual rooftop perch with Mirko. The city sprawled below them, a galaxy of electric stars. "Heard you're teaching the unicorn how to play with string," she said, landing silently beside him. "Getting domestic on me, pretty boy?" "It's about control," he replied, not taking his eyes off the city. "She needs to see her hands as tools, not as weapons. It's the first step." "And what's the next step?" she asked, her tone softening. "Getting her to smile without being afraid," he said quietly. Mirko was silent for a moment. "You're a good man, Naruto Uzumaki," she said, her voice a low murmur. "I try to be," he replied. He then turned to her, his expression shifting to one of professional focus. "Anything new on the street?" "It's quiet," she said, her own demeanor turning serious. "Too quiet. The usual gangs are laying low. The small-time villains are running scared. It's like the entire underworld is holding its breath, waiting for something." She crossed her arms, her powerful muscles flexing. "And I don't like it. It feels like the calm before a storm." "It is," Naruto confirmed. My clones have been tracking whispers. Something big happened out in the provinces. A city called Diaka. There was some kind of civil war. A group called the Meta Liberation Army. The MLA? They're a myth, Mirko scoffed. A boogeyman story for conspiracy theorists. They were real, Naruto corrected her. And they went to war with the League of Villains. For an entire city. Mirko stared at him, the implications of his words sinking in. A war between two major villain factions, and not a single hero had known about it. Who won? She asked, her voice a low growl. I don't know, he admitted. The entire city is a media dead zone. The HPSC has it locked down tight. But whoever walked out of that city. They're the new apex predator. They're the storm that's coming. As if on cue, the massive television screens in the city square below them all flickered to life. It wasn't an advertisement or a news report. It was a broadcast, raw and unedited, that had hijacked every screen in the country. The image was of a triumphant Tomura Shigaraki, his face no longer hidden by a hand, but scarred and confident. He stood atop a mountain of rubble, the ruins of Diaka city behind him. At his side were the remnants of the League, and behind them, a vast, cheering army of thousands. Citizens of this broken society, Shigaraki's voice, no longer a childish whine but a cold, resonant baritone, echoed across the nation. Your heroes have lied to you. They have offered you a fragile peace, a cage of rules and regulations. We offer you freedom. He held up a hand, and the massive villain Gigantomachia rose from the rubble behind him. The Meta Liberation Army and the League of Villains are no more. From this day forward, we are one. We are the Paranormal Liberation Front. And we are here to set you free. He looked directly into the camera, a terrifying, unhinged grin on his face. The game is over. A new world is coming. And we will be its liberators. The broadcast cut out, replaced by the panicked faces of news anchors. But the message had been delivered. The storm was no longer coming. It had just made landfall. On the rooftop, Naruto and Mirko looked at each other, the playful banter gone, replaced by the grim, silent understanding of two soldiers on the eve of a great war. The screens went dead, plunging the city square back into the neon-lit chaos of a normal evening. But nothing was normal anymore. A wave of panic screams and shouts erupted from the streets below as the reality of Shigaraki's declaration sank in. The world had just received a formal declaration of war. On the rooftop, Mirko crushed the glass bottle in her hand, her knuckles white. That son of a bitch, she growled, her voice a low, feral thrum of pure rage. He just declared war on the entire country. She turned to Naruto, her red eyes blazing with a bloodthirsty fire. So what's the plan, number one? We find them, and I kick their teeth so far down their throats they'll have to unbutton their pants to chew. No, Naruto said, his voice a blade of ice that cut through her rage. That's what he wants. He wants us to be reckless. He wants panic. He wants chaos. He looked down at the terrified city, his expression grim. We're not going to give it to him. He made a single hand sign. Kaju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. In 100 silent puffs of smoke, the rooftop was suddenly filled with identical, white-jacketed figures. The clones didn't speak. They simply turned to the original, their expressions as serious as his, and waited for their orders. The HPSC has locked down Diaka City, Naruto commanded, his voice ringing with the authority of a cage addressing his Anbu. They're trying to control the information. We're going to get it first. He pointed to half of the clones. You have one objective, infiltrate Diaka. I don't care how. Get past the quarantine. I want to know everything. Shigaraki's new power level, the command structure of his front, their numbers, their resources. Everything. The 50 clones nodded once and vanished, leaping from the rooftop and melting into the city's shadows. The rest of you, Naruto said to the remaining clones, spread out. You are my eyes and ears. I want a complete intelligence network covering every major city in this country by sunrise. Monitor the hero networks, the police channels, the underworld. If Shigaraki's army makes a move, I want to know about it before they even take their first step. The remaining clones disappeared, a silent, instantaneous deployment of the most effective intelligence-gathering force the world had ever known. Mirko watched, her initial rage replaced by a stunned, profound awe. While the heroes of the world were still processing the threat, Naruto had already launched a nationwide counterintelligence operation in less than 30 seconds. So what do we do? She asked, her voice quiet. Now, Naruto said, turning to her, a sliver of his usual calm returning. We wait for the HPSC to stop panicking and call a meeting. And then, we give them a plan. The emergency meeting of Japan's top 10 heroes was held 2 days later in a secure, underground bunker beneath the HPSC headquarters. The atmosphere was thick with tension. The president of the commission sat at the head of a large, circular table, her face a mask of grim control. Around her sat the pillars of the hero world. Endeavor, his face a thunderous scowl, his flames burning with a low, angry intensity. The winged hero, Hawks, who looked uncharacteristically serious. Bastionist, Edgeshot, and the others were all there, their expressions grave. And at the opposite end of the table sat Naruto and Mirko. Mirko was leaning back in her chair, her arms crossed, radiating an aura of impatient, predatory energy. Naruto was perfectly still, his hands clasped on the table, his calm presence a stark contrast to the barely contained anxiety in the room. The situation is unprecedented, the president began, her voice sharp. The Paranormal Liberation Front numbers over 100,000 strong. They have absorbed the resources of the Meta Liberation Army and the corporate power of the Deetnerot Company. They are, for all intents and purposes, a rogue nation. So we hit them, Endeavor's voice boomed, his fist slamming onto the table. We gather our forces and we burn them to the ground. A frontal assault would be suicide, Edgeshot countered, his voice a calm whisper. We have no concrete intelligence on their leadership's location or their primary bases of operation. My sources say they're consolidating power, but the leadership is scattered, Hawks added, his eyes flicking toward Naruto. Finding them will take months. We don't have months, Naruto said, his voice quiet but drawing the immediate, undivided attention of everyone in the room. He slid a simple, hand-drawn map onto the center of the table. It was a map of Japan, marked with 2 large red circles. We have 4 days, he continued. At which point, Shigaraki will have finished his upgrade. And will be fully operational. When that happens, the war is already lost. The room was silent. And how could you possibly know this? The president demanded, her voice dripping with skepticism. Because my sources are better than yours, Naruto replied, his gaze unwavering. The Paranormal Liberation Front is operating out of 2 primary locations. The first is the Gunga Mountain Villa, the former headquarters of the MLA. That's where the bulk of their army is gathering. The second, he said, tapping the other circle, is Jaku General Hospital. The founder of the hospital, Dr. Shigaraki, is All for One's personal physician. And in a secret sub-basement facility, he is currently augmenting Tomura Shigaraki's body, granting him a power that will rival All for One himself. The heroes stared at the map, then at Naruto, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. He wasn't just presenting a theory. He was stating facts, intelligence so precise and impossible that it defied all logic. This is insane, Endeavor grumbled, though his eyes were fixed on the map. How could you know this? It doesn't matter how I know, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the arguments. It only matters what we do about it. In 4 days, we launch a coordinated, 2-pronged assault. We hit both locations simultaneously, with overwhelming force. We cut the head off the snake before it even knows we're in its den. He looked around the table, his gaze landing on each of the top heroes. He was no longer a student or a rookie. He was a commander, outlining his battle plan. Endeavor, he said, his tone direct. You will lead the assault on the hospital. Your firepower is necessary to contain the high-end Nomus we know are being stored there. Hawks, you will be his support. Your speed is essential for evacuating the civilian wing of the hospital before the main assault begins. He then looked at the other heroes. The rest of you will lead the charge on the Gunga Mountain Villa. It will be a full-scale war. Your objective is to dismantle their command structure and scatter their army. And what will you be doing, number 1? Endeavor asked, his voice a low, challenging rumble. Naruto stood up, a silent, absolute authority radiating from him. I'm going hunting, he said, his blue eyes glowing with a cold, hard light. I'm going to the sub-basement of that hospital. And I'm going to end Tomura Shigaraki, permanently. The plan was audacious. It was reckless. And it was their only chance. But before the heroes could even begin to process the sheer scale of the proposed operation, Naruto spoke again, his voice dropping, becoming something colder, older. Of course, he said, his gaze sweeping across their shocked faces, there is another option. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. This plan requires you, the heroes of this country, to risk your lives. It will be bloody. There will be casualties. But it is the heroic way. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The other option is simpler. Cleaner. You all stay here. You prepare for the aftermath. And you give me permission to end this. What are you talking about, boy? Endeavor growled. Naruto looked at him, and for a moment, the hero of this world was gone, replaced entirely by the war veteran of another. 100,000 soldiers. 2 primary locations. I could go in there alone, and by sunrise, the Paranormal Liberation Front would cease to exist. Every last one of them. But to do that, you have to sanction lethal force. You have to allow me to kill them all. A deep, chilling silence fell over the room. The hero stared at him, horrified. He wasn't boasting. He was making a genuine, strategic offer. The casual way he spoke of slaughtering an army of 100,000 people was more terrifying than any villain's threat. It was the cold, pragmatic logic of a shinobi, a concept utterly alien to their code of ethics. "We are heroes," Bastionist finally said, his voice tight. "We do not kill. We save." "Are you certain?" Naruto's voice cut back, sharp and cold, silencing any murmurs of agreement. He looked directly at Bastionist, his gaze pinning the hero in his seat. "Because if you choose the heroic way, I can guarantee you that heroes will die. I have seen their power. I have felt their numbers. You will lose people. Good people." He straightened up, his gaze sweeping across the table, forcing each of them to meet his eyes. "So that is the choice before you. The lives of 100,000 villains who have declared war on your society. Or the lives of your comrades. What's better? The death of a whole lot of scum, or our best heroes dying?" The question hung in the air, a terrible, logical weight. He had stripped the morality from the equation, leaving only a brutal, pragmatic calculation. After a long, heavy silence, it was Endeavor who spoke, his voice a low growl. "We will fight. We will not become butchers." "I see," Naruto said. The cold, ancient warrior receded, replaced once more by the calm, confident number 1. "Then my first plan is the only one on the table." He looked around at them, a silent challenge in his eyes. "Are you with me?" The choice had been made for them. They would fight a war, because the alternative he offered was a massacre. The war was coming, and Naruto Uzumaki had just placed himself at its absolute, bloody center. The heavy silence in the bunker after Naruto's ultimatum was a physical weight. The heroes of Japan, the 10 strongest individuals in the country, had been presented with a choice they were ethically incapable of making. They had chosen the path of heroes, the path of blood and sacrifice. As the meeting adjourned, the heroes filed out, their faces grim, the weight of the coming war settling upon them. Naruto and Mirko were the last to leave, walking down the long, sterile corridor back toward the surface. "You know," Mirko said, her voice a low, dangerous murmur that echoed slightly in the confined space. "For a minute there, I actually thought you were going to do it." "Do what?" Naruto asked, his tone deceptively casual. "Kill them all," she shot back, stopping to face him. The playful energy was gone from her eyes, replaced by a sharp, analytical intensity. 100,000 people. You said it like you were ordering takeout. Were you serious? Naruto met her gaze, his own expression unreadable. "Where I learned to fight," he said, his voice quiet, "you were a soldier before you were a hero. I've seen what happens when you hesitate, when you let your ideals get in the way of a necessary evil. Good people die. People I cared about." He looked away, a flicker of ancient pain in his eyes. "So yes, I was serious. If they had given the order, the war would be over by now. There would be no risk to any of you. It would just be a very long night for me." Mirko stared at him, her mind struggling to comprehend the sheer scale of what he was saying. She had always seen him as a ridiculously powerful kid, a prodigy, a challenge. But this was something else. This was the cold, hard calculus of a man who had made impossible choices before. It was terrifying. And, in a way she didn't want to admit, it was the most reassuring thing she had ever heard. "You're a real piece of work, you know that?" she finally said, shaking her head as they started walking again. A slow, dangerous grin spread across her face. "Good. A little cold-blooded pragmatism is exactly what we need right now." She nudged his shoulder with her own. "But for the record, I'm glad they said no. I'd hate to miss the party." "I figured you would be," he said, a small smile touching his lips. The news of the impending operation was not shared with the public, but a new, palpable tension settled over UA High. The students of Class 1A, perceptive as they were, knew something was wrong. Their teachers were absent more often, replaced by substitutes. The top pro heroes, once a common sight on the news, had all but vanished from the public eye. Naruto called a meeting in the 1A common room that night. He didn't tell them the specifics, the locations, the targets, the timeline. That was classified. But he told them what they needed to know. "A major hero operation is about to take place," he said, his voice calm and steady as he stood before his assembled classmates. The largest in this country's history. And many of you will be asked to participate. A wave of nervous murmurs went through the room. I'm not going to lie to you, Naruto continued, his gaze sweeping over their faces, over Izuku's determined expression, Bakugo's simmering intensity, and Todoroki's quiet focus. This is not an exercise. It's not an exam. This is real. You will be facing the entire Paranormal Liberation Front. You will be fighting for your lives. He made a hand sign. A dozen clones appeared, each one holding a small, specialized kunai knife. These are for you, he said. Keep them on you at all times. If you are isolated, if you are overwhelmed, if you are about to die, throw it. As far as you can. I will be there. He was giving each of them a lifeline, a direct, instantaneous connection to him. It was a promise of protection, a symbol of his role not just as the number one hero, but as their friend. This is your final test, Naruto said, his voice softening. Everything we've been through, the USJ, the training camp, the provisional license exam, it was all to prepare you for this. Don't fight to be a hero. Fight to protect the person next to you. Fight to come home. He looked at Izuku, a silent, profound understanding passing between them. No matter what happens, Naruto said, his voice a low murmur for all to hear, I've got your back. The night before the raid, the city was quiet. A fragile, temporary peace had settled over the world, the deep breath before the plunge. Naruto stood on the rooftop of Mirko's penthouse, looking out at the glittering expanse of lights. He heard her land behind him, her footsteps silent. Couldn't sleep? She asked, coming to stand beside him. She wasn't in her hero costume, but in simple workout clothes. Too quiet, he replied. It's always the quietest right before the battle. She was silent for a moment, just watching the city with him. You know, she said, her voice a low purr, I've been in a lot of fights. Fought a lot of ugly bastards. But this feels different. Bigger. It is, he confirmed. She turned to him, her red eyes serious in the moonlight. You better come back from this, you hear me, pretty boy? She said, her voice a low, dangerous command. You've got a date you still haven't finished. He looked at her, at the fierce, unwavering strength in her eyes, and a genuine, warm smile touched his lips. Wouldn't dream of missing it, he replied. She held his gaze for a long moment, and then, in a move that was uncharacteristically gentle, she reached up and placed a hand on his cheek. Good, she whispered. She leaned in and gave him a quick, hard kiss on the corner of his mouth. It was not a kiss of passion, but of promise. A soldier's farewell. Before he could react, she pulled back, her usual fiery, challenging grin returning. Now, she said, cracking her knuckles. Let's go start a war. At dawn, two armies assembled. At the Gunga Mountain Villa, a force of over 16,000 heroes, led by Edge Shot and the other top pros, prepared to storm the mountain fortress. Outside Jaku General Hospital, a smaller, more specialized strike team, led by Endeavor, gathered in the pre-dawn gloom. Their faces were grim, their expressions set. They were the tip of the spear, aimed at the heart of the enemy. And a few blocks away, standing alone on a rooftop as the first rays of sun broke over the horizon, Naruto Uzumaki took a deep breath. He entered sage mode, the orange pigmentation appearing around his eyes, the very air around him growing heavy with the pressure of immense, natural energy. The time for planning was over. The time for talking was done. The war had begun. The sun crested the horizon, casting long, stark shadows across Jaku City. For the heroes assembled, it was the dawn of a war. Hawks, you're on the clock, Endeavor's voice, a low rumble of contained fire, crackled over the private comms channel. Evacuate the civilian wing and neutralize the outer perimeter. You have 10 minutes. 10 minutes? Hawks's voice replied, impossibly calm and casual. I'll do it in 5. Don't start the party without me. A crimson feather, impossibly sharp, detached from his wings and shot across the city block, silently slitting the throat of a hidden lookout on the hospital roof. The war's first casualty fell without a sound. Hawks was already a blur, a crimson ghost moving through the hospital's outer corridors, his feathers a silent, lethal storm disabling guards and guiding terrified nurses and patients toward the predesignated safe zones. While Hawks worked, the main assault team moved into position. Endeavor stood at the front, a towering figure of incandescent rage. Beside him, Mirko bounced on the balls of her feet, her grin a terrifying slash of feral anticipation. The other pro heroes, a collection of Japan's finest, formed a grim, determined line behind them. Mirko, Endeavor growled, not looking at her. You are the breach. When Hawks gives the signal, You go through the front wall. Cause as much chaos as possible. Draw their attention. Hey, Mirko let out a low, dangerous chuckle. You say chaos like it's a bad thing. She crouched, her powerful leg muscles coiling like springs. Just try to keep up, old man. A few blocks away, Naruto stood on his rooftop, his eyes closed, the world a vibrant tapestry of energy signatures to his sage mode senses. He could feel hawks moving through the hospital, a swift, precise scalpel. He could feel the coiled power of Endeavor's team. And deep beneath the earth, he could feel it, a cold, dark, and rapidly growing malignancy. Shigaraki. 4 minutes, a clone's voice echoed in his mind. Hawks is clear. Perimeter is secure. Evacuation is at 90%. Naruto opened his eyes. He looked down at the hospital, a silent, unmoving god of the battlefield. Signal is green, Hawks's voice came over the comms. The stage is yours. Endeavor didn't need another command. Go, he roared. The signal was Mirko. She shot forward like a cannonball, a black and white blur of unrestrained power. She didn't bother with the door. Her foot, wreathed in a crackling aura of energy, slammed into the reinforced concrete wall of the hospital lobby. Luna fall. The wall didn't just break, it exploded inward in a shower of dust and rubble. Mirko landed in the center of the lobby, a 3-point superhero landing that cracked the marble floor, her red eyes blazing. Hope you've got good insurance, she roared at the stunned Paranormal Liberation Front soldiers. Because the rabbit hero is here to make a house call. She was a whirlwind of destruction. The villains in the lobby, expecting a subtle infiltration, were met with a force of nature. Mirko moved through them, a dance of devastating, bone-shattering kicks. Endeavor and the rest of the heroes charged through the breach she had created, their quirks erupting in a symphony of controlled chaos. The battle for Jaku General Hospital had begun. While the lobby erupted into a full-scale war zone, Naruto moved. The main assault was the perfect diversion. He vanished from his rooftop in a silent flash of yellow light, reappearing inside the hospital on the 4th floor, a Hiraishin kunai already planted there by a clone. The floor was chaos, alarms blaring, villains scrambling to respond to the attack below. Naruto moved through them like a ghost. He didn't fight. He flowed. A villain would turn, and he would already be gone. He was a whisper in the storm, his destination the dark, hidden depths of the building. He found the elevator that led to the morgue, and beneath it, the hidden entrance to the sub-basement. He could feel it now, the cold, oppressive aura of the laboratory below. He placed a hand on the reinforced steel door. It's time to cut the head off the snake, he thought. Deeper in the facility, in a sterile white room filled with bubbling green tubes, Dr. Shigaraki watched his monitors, his face a mask of panicked fury. They're here. How could they be here? The heroes are at the Gunga Villa. It was a perfect diversion. He looked at the central tube, where the sleeping, scarred form of Tomura Shigaraki floated in a nutrient bath. The augmentation process was at 75%. He's not ready. He needs more time. Suddenly, a new monitor flickered to life, showing a grainy security feed from the hidden elevator. It showed a single, blonde-haired boy in a white flak jacket, standing before the reinforced door. Who is that? The doctor hissed. A student? How did he get down here? On the screen, the boy simply placed his hand on the door. The doctor watched, confused. Then, his eyes went wide with horror as the boy's hand began to glow with a swirling, blue sphere of pure, grinding energy. Rasengan, Naruto said to the empty hallway, and pushed. The multi-ton, reinforced vault door didn't just break. It was annihilated, torn from its hinges and ripped into a spiral of twisted metal, the force of the impact sending a shockwave down the corridor. Naruto stepped through the ruined doorway, his sage mode eyes glowing with a cold, righteous fury. He looked at the terrified doctor, at the rows of bubbling tubes containing monstrous, half-formed Nomus, and finally, at the sleeping form of his true target. The doctor is in, Naruto said, his voice a low, dangerous promise. And your appointment has been cancelled. Dr. Garaki stared, his scientific mind momentarily short-circuiting in the face of such impossible, overwhelming power. He scrambled backward, his hand fumbling for a large, red button on his console. You cannot stop it. The will of my master is absolute. His successor will be his greatest creation. His master was a broken man on life support, Naruto countered, taking a slow, deliberate step into the lab. I dealt with him. This one, he said, his gaze locking onto Shigaraki's tube, is an abomination. A perversion of science and nature. I'm not here to stop it. I'm here to erase it. The cold certainty in Naruto's voice snapped the doctor out of his fear. replacing it with a fanatical rage. You think you've won? You understand nothing. My master's body may have been weak, but his mind, his quirk, they were perfect. Tomura Shigaraki is the next step. A body designed to not only hold that power, but to amplify it. To merge it with his own decay. He will not just rule the world, he will be able to unmake it with a touch. He is a god in the making. The doctor slammed his hand down on the red button. And a god needs his angels. A deafening hiss of hydraulic pressure filled the room. The glass tubes lining the walls began to drain, and the monstrous, half-formed creatures within stirred. Their eyes snapped open, glowing with a malevolent, mindless light. They were high-end Nomus, each one as powerful as the creature from the USJ, and they were all waking up. My beautiful children. Dr. Garaki cackled, a wild, insane glee in his eyes. Keep our guest occupied. I must accelerate the procedure. He turned to another console, his fingers flying across a keyboard, initiating a rapid, high-voltage awakening sequence for Shigaraki. Naruto watched as a half-dozen of the grotesque, multi-limbed monsters pulled themselves from their tubes, their bodies still dripping with green fluid. He could feel their power, a chaotic, violent storm of stolen quirks and raw, unnatural strength. He didn't look worried. He just looked annoyed. More toys to break, he sighed. He made a single-hand sign. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. 5 shadow clones appeared beside him, each one radiating the same calm, deadly focus as the original. The Rasengan and Rasen Shuriken in the original's hands vanished. This wasn't a job for overwhelming power. It was a job for tactical dismantling. You each get one, Naruto said to his clones. Analyze their quirks. Find their weaknesses. Do not destroy the lab. I'll handle the cleanup. The clones nodded in unison. The high-end Nomus let out a synchronized, ear-splitting screech and charged. The battle for the lab began. It was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Each clone engaged a single high-end, not in a brawl, but in a deadly, high-speed diagnostic. One Nomu had arms that could stretch like rubber, its clone countered with precise, targeted strikes to its joints. Another could regenerate almost instantly, its clone focused not on damage, but on restraining it with chakra-infused wires made from a nearby power conduit. The original Naruto flowed between the fights, a silent, untouchable observer. He was the central processor, absorbing the data from his clones in real time. Clone 1 report, target has super regeneration and hardening. Weakness is internal. High-frequency vibrations disrupt the regeneration process. Clone 2 report, target has shock absorption and muscle augmentation. Kinetic force is useless. Vulnerable to piercing attacks. While his clones fought, Dr. Garaki worked frantically, sweat beading on his brow. The monitor displaying Shigaraki's status began to flash red. Awakening sequence at 90% 91% upstairs, in the main hospital corridors, the battle raged. Mirko was a force of nature, a one-woman wrecking crew carving a path through the Paranormal Liberation Front's elite guards. She moved with a joyful, terrifying ferocity, her kicks shattering walls and sending villains flying. But she was not invincible. A villain with a liquid metal quirk managed to catch her leg, sharp tendrils of steel piercing her thigh. She roared, not in pain, but in fury, and simply tore her leg free, her own blood spraying across the floor. She was wounded, but she was smiling. Back in the lab, Naruto had all the information he needed. Time for the cleanup, he said to himself. He vanished, appearing beside the regenerating Nomu. He didn't use a Rasengan. He simply placed his palm on its chest and unleashed a precise, high-frequency pulse of chakra, a technique learned from medical ninjutsu. The Nomu's body seized, its regeneration sputtering and failing as its cells were vibrated into inert sludge. Flash! He was behind the shock-absorbing Nomu. A single, wind-infused kunai, thrown with pinpoint accuracy, pierced the monster's brain. It crumpled to the ground, its primary weakness exploited. One by one, he moved through the lab, a silent, efficient angel of death. He was a surgeon, dismantling the doctor's masterpieces with a precision that was more insulting than any display of raw power. In less than a minute, all 6 high-end Nomus lay defeated on the lab floor. The clones dissipated. Dr. Garaki spun around from his console, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The battle was over. He had lost. 98% 99% Naruto turned his gaze to the final tube, his sage mode senses screaming at him. The power inside was reaching its absolute peak. He had won the battle, but he was about to lose the war. He shot forward, a golden blur of sage mode energy, his hand forming a Rasengan aimed directly at the glass tube. He had to end it, now. 100%. Awakening complete. Just as his Rasengan was about to connect, the thick, reinforced glass of the tube didn't just break. It disintegrated into a fine, gray dust. The green liquid within drained away in a sudden rush, and the figure of Tomura Shigaraki, his white hair now long and flowing, his body scarred but whole, dropped to the floor. He slowly lifted his head, and his single, glowing red eye met Naruto's. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't scowling. His expression was one of blank, terrifying emptiness. And then, he spoke, his voice a low, raspy whisper that seemed to suck the very sound from the room. "Who are you?" The laboratory was a tomb of defeated monsters, the silence broken only by the frantic, terrified breathing of Dr. Garaki. Naruto stood amidst the wreckage, his sage mode senses focused entirely on the figure that had just dropped from the shattered tube. Tomura Shigaraki rose to his feet. His movements were no longer the jerky, uncoordinated motions of the old Shigaraki. He moved with a fluid, unnerving grace, his long white hair obscuring a face that was a mask of blank, terrifying emptiness. He looked at the ruined lab, at the fallen Nomus, and then his single, glowing red eye landed on Naruto. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice a dry, emotionless rasp. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't angry. He was a blank slate, a newborn god of destruction looking upon the first living thing it had ever seen. Naruto didn't answer. He shot forward, a golden blur of sage mode energy, a swirling Rasengan forming in his palm, aimed directly at the villain's heart. This had to end, now. He was a fraction of a second too late. The moment Naruto moved, Shigaraki's instincts, honed by All for One's will and his own innate destructive impulses, took over. He didn't dodge. He didn't block. He simply placed a hand on the floor. And the world began to unravel. A wave of gray, silent decay erupted from his palm, spreading across the floor like a tidal wave of nothingness. The reinforced concrete, the steel plating, the bodies of the defeated Nomus, everything it touched simply crumbled into fine, gray dust. The wave shot toward Naruto with impossible speed. Naruto's sage mode senses screamed. This wasn't an attack. It was an anti-creation, a power that didn't break things, but simply unmade them. He instantly abandoned his attack, teleporting with Hiraishin to a kunai he had thrown earlier, reappearing on a high gantry near the ceiling just as the wave of decay washed over the spot where he had been standing. The entire floor of the laboratory ceased to exist, revealing the raw earth and bedrock several meters below. "Interesting," Shigaraki murmured, looking at his own hand as if seeing it for the first time. He then looked up at Naruto, a flicker of something, curiosity, perhaps, in his empty gaze. "You're fast." He pushed off the ground, his movements a blur, his body augmented with a dozen stolen quirks, his speed rivaling Naruto's own. He appeared on the gantry in front of Naruto, his hand outstretched. Naruto met him. The battle that followed was not a brawl, it was a frantic, high-speed dance on the edge of a razor. Naruto couldn't touch him. He couldn't allow a single finger to make contact with his skin. He flowed around Shigaraki's attacks, his movements economical and precise, a master of evasion. Shigaraki, in turn, was a force of pure, instinctual destruction. He didn't have skill, not yet. He had overwhelming power. The air crackled with stolen quirks, black tendrils erupted from his back, air cannons fired from his palms, all of it layered over the constant, terrifying threat of his decay. "Hold still," Shigaraki said, his voice still a flat monotone. "I want to see what happens when you turn to dust." He was adapting, learning at a terrifying rate. He began to use his decay not just on the environment, but as a weapon, sending out waves of it, forcing Naruto to constantly teleport, to stay on the defensive. It was during one of these desperate, instantaneous jumps that Naruto felt it. A deep, ancient, and profoundly annoyed rumble in the back of his mind. "This is pathetic, kid," a voice grumbled, a sound he hadn't heard in almost 2 decades. "This little gnat is making you dance like a puppet. Are you going to let him?" "Kurama?" Naruto thought, his focus almost wavering in shock. "Who else?" The fox's voice shot back, laced with its familiar, grumpy affection. "You're fighting an imitation. A cheap copy of the old man's power, stitched together with spit and glue. Stop dodging. Hit him." The brief, internal conversation was all Shigaraki needed. He anticipated Naruto's next Hiraishin jump, appearing at the kunai's location a fraction of a second before Naruto did. His hand, wreathed in the gray dust of his decay, was aimed directly at Naruto's chest. There was no time to dodge. No time to teleport. So Naruto stopped dodging. He let the raw, untamed power of his oldest friend flood his system. A wave of brilliant, crimson chakra, thick and malevolent, erupted from him, forming a single, massive tail. The chakra cloak was a physical thing, a shield of pure, condensed energy. Shigaraki's hand slammed into the crimson shield. The decay quirk, the power that could unmake cities, met the chakra of the nine-tailed fox. And for a moment, nothing happened. The two absolute forces, one of unmaking and one of pure, untamed life, cancelled each other out in a silent, violent stalemate. Shigaraki was thrown backward, his arm smoking, the feedback from the collision momentarily overloading his own quirk. Naruto stood there, wreathed in the crimson glow of Kurama's power, his blue eyes now a feral, slitted red. He looked at Shigaraki, and for the first time since the fight began, he smiled. A wide, foxy, and utterly terrifying grin. "Okay," Naruto said, his voice a low, dangerous growl that was now two voices speaking as one. "My turn." With his declaration echoing in the ruined laboratory, Naruto didn't teleport. He simply moved. He shot across the chasm that had once been the lab floor, the crimson chakra of the nine tails propelling him forward with a speed that made his sage mode look like a leisurely stroll. He was a red comet aimed at the heart of the new world's greatest evil. Shigaraki reacted on pure instinct, his hand lashing out, a wave of gray decay erupting to meet the charge. But this time, Naruto didn't dodge. A massive, spectral claw of crimson chakra formed around Naruto's arm. It met the wave of decay head-on. The two forces collided, not with an explosion, but with a deafening, grinding screech of reality being torn apart. The decay ate at the edges of the chakra claw, but the sheer, overwhelming life force of the Baiju's power regenerated it faster than it could be unmade. Naruto pushed through the wave, his chakra claw swiping at Shigaraki's face. The villain was forced to leap back, a thin red line appearing on his cheek where the chakra had grazed him. It was the first time he had been physically wounded. "His regeneration quirk is fighting my chakra," Kurama's voice rumbled in Naruto's mind, a familiar, comforting presence in the heat of battle. "It's a powerful one, but it's not instantaneous. Don't give him a moment to breathe. Overwhelm him." "Don't have to tell me twice," Naruto muttered aloud, his foxy grin widening. He was relentless. He became a blur of crimson and black, a whirlwind of motion that filled the massive cavern. He didn't give Shigaraki a moment to think, a second to analyze. He was all pressure, all aggression. A chakra-empowered punch would force Shigaraki to dodge, only for a sweeping tail of red energy to try and take out his legs. Shigaraki was no longer the calm, curious destroyer. He was a cornered animal, lashing out with a chaotic storm of stolen quirks. Rivets of hardened bone shot from his back. Bursts of concussive air fired from his hands. But every attack was met and contemptuously swatted aside by the swirling, protective cloak of Kurama's chakra. Upstairs, the battle for the hospital had reached a fever pitch. Mirko, her leg bleeding but her spirit unbroken, fought side by side with Endeavor. They were a perfect, terrifying duo of fire and fury, carving a path through the elite soldiers of the Paranormal Liberation Front. Suddenly, the entire hospital began to shake. A deep, rhythmic booming, like the heartbeat of a god, echoed up from the building's foundations. "What in the hell is that?" Mirko yelled, kicking a villain through a concrete wall. Endeavor paused, his flames flaring as he felt the sheer, overwhelming pressure of the power emanating from below. It was a chaotic, terrifying mixture of two immense energies. One was cold and dead, the energy of all for one. The other was something else entirely. Something wild, ancient, and alive. "That," Endeavor growled, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror, "is the number one." Back in the cavern, the battle was escalating. The very rock of the walls had begun to melt and crumble under the sheer pressure of the two combatants' power. Dr. Garaki, forgotten in the chaos, could only cower behind a ruined console, his mind completely broken by the battle of gods unfolding before him. Shigaraki, battered and bruised, his regeneration quirk working overtime to heal the dozens of minor wounds Naruto had inflicted, was finally pushed to the brink. A flicker of a new, colder intelligence entered his eyes. It was the will of his master, all for one, taking a more direct role. "You are strong," Shigaraki's voice said, losing its flat monotone and gaining a new, ancient authority. "But you are still just a beast." He slammed both hands on the ground. The decay that erupted was different. It wasn't just a wave. The entire cavern, the bedrock, the foundations of the hospital itself, began to groan and disintegrate. He wasn't just trying to kill Naruto anymore. He was trying to bring the entire city down on top of them. Naruto leapt back, landing on a floating piece of rubble. He looked at the spreading decay, at the groaning, cracking ceiling. He could feel it through his sage mode, the thousands of lives in the hospital above, the hundreds of thousands in the city around them. "Kit, he's going to sink the whole block." Kurama roared in his mind. Naruto knew he couldn't win this fight here. Not without sacrificing everyone above. He had to end it, now, with one overwhelming blow. Or he had to move the fight. He held out his hand. A swirling, miniature vortex of black and crimson energy began to form in his palm, the chakra of the 9 tails compressing into a single, dense point. It was the ultimate expression of his power. A tailed beast bomb. He looked at Shigaraki, who was watching him, a triumphant, insane grin finally spreading across his face. He was being offered a choice: destroy his opponent and everyone else along with him, or retreat and let the destruction spread. It was an impossible choice. A hero's choice. And Naruto Uzumaki had never been a conventional hero. The tailed beast bomb in Naruto's palm was a miniature black hole, a sphere of perfect, destructive energy that warped the air around it. Shigaraki's insane grin widened. He saw the choice before his opponent: obliterate him and bury the hospital in rubble, or retreat and allow his decay to consume the city. For a villain born of nihilism, both outcomes were a victory. "Kit, what are you doing?" Kurama's voice roared in his mind. "You can't use that here." "I'm not going to," Naruto replied, his thoughts a blur of cold, hard calculation. "I'm just going to make him think I am." He didn't throw the tailed beast bomb. He fired it. A massive, brilliant beam of pure, crimson-black chakra erupted from his hand. It wasn't the city-leveling explosion Shigaraki expected. It was a concentrated, piercing laser of unimaginable power, aimed not at Shigaraki himself, but at the crumbling ceiling high above him. The beam tore through the remaining bedrock and the hospital's foundations like they were paper, shooting up through all 5 stories of the building and erupting from the roof into the morning sky. It was a brilliant, terrifying pillar of light, a beacon that was visible for miles. Upstairs, the heroes fighting in the hospital corridors were thrown from their feet as the entire building groaned, a massive, perfectly circular hole having been bored straight through its center. "What was that?" Mirko yelled, landing on her feet, her eyes wide as she stared at the pillar of crimson energy that had just appeared and vanished in the sky. "Was that him?" Shigaraki, for his part, was completely thrown off balance. The attack was overwhelming, nonsensical. He had been forced to instinctively raise a wall of earth to defend against a blow that was never aimed at him. The sheer, audacious waste of power was a perfect distraction. And it was all Naruto needed. While Shigaraki's attention was on the beam, Naruto moved. He shot forward, a red blur, the tailed beast bomb in his hand dissipating, its purpose served. He closed the distance in an instant. Shigaraki spun to meet him, his hands lashing out, his decay quirk activating. Naruto didn't dodge. He met the attack head-on, his Kurama chakra cloaked hand slamming against Shigaraki's. The two forces met again, the energy of unmaking against the energy of a demon god. The air screamed as reality warped around their point of contact. Naruto's chakra cloak sizzled and evaporated where the decay touched it, but it held for a crucial half-second. In that half-second, Naruto's other hand, glowing with the faint, blue light of a Fuinjutsu seal, slapped firmly onto the center of Shigaraki's chest. The Hiraishin seal flared to life, a permanent, invisible mark that tied the villain's location directly to Naruto's will. Naruto leapt back, a safe distance away. The entire exchange had taken less than 2 seconds. Shigaraki looked down at his chest, then back at Naruto, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "A trick? What was that?" "That," Naruto said, his foxy grin returning, "was your ticket out of here." He raised his hand, a Hiraishin kunai held between his fingers. He focused, not on his own location, but on the seal now branded on Shigaraki's soul, and on the location of another kunai he had a clone place hours ago, in preparation for this exact contingency. He activated the jutsu. Shigaraki's world dissolved. He wasn't moving. He was being moved. The laws of space and time were being rewritten around him. The 2 immense power signatures that had been shaking the foundations of Jaku General Hospital vanished. One moment they were there, a battle of gods shaking the earth. The next, they were simply gone. The hospital fell silent, save for the distant sounds of the ongoing battles. Endeavor, Mirko, and the other heroes stood in the ruined corridors, a profound, unnerving stillness settling over them. The epicenter of the war had just been teleported away. Dr. Garaki, cowering behind his console, stared at the empty cavern, his mind finally, completely snapping. His god had vanished. 1,000 miles away, over the vast, empty expanse of the Pacific Ocean, a swirling vortex of space appeared in the sky. From it, 2 figures were unceremoniously dumped into the open air, 10,000 feet above the churning waves. Shigaraki tumbled through the air, his mind reeling, his senses screaming at the sudden, violent displacement. Below him, there was nothing but an endless, empty sea. Naruto floated a few dozen feet away from him, his crimson chakra cloak burning brightly against the blue sky. He had moved the battlefield. You wanted to destroy a city, Naruto's voice echoed across the open air, calm and absolute. Fine. Try this one instead. He pointed down at the empty ocean. There are no heroes here to get in your way. No civilians to worry about. Just you, me, and a whole lot of water. He crossed his arms, the single crimson tail of his chakra cloak swishing behind him. Let's see what you've really got. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, there was only the roar of the wind and the vast, empty blue of the sky and sea. Tomura Shigaraki, the newly birthed god of destruction, was completely untethered, tumbling through the open air 10,000 feet above an endless ocean. His mind, a chaotic storm of borrowed power and nascent consciousness, struggled to process the sudden, violent shift in reality. What? What is this place? He rasped, his voice lost in the wind. The city, the hospital, the war, it was all gone, replaced by an empty, featureless world. This, Naruto's voice echoed, calm and absolute, is your grave. Shigaraki looked up to see Naruto floating a few dozen feet away, wreathed in the crimson, bubbling cloak of Kurama's chakra. He wasn't falling. He was standing on the air itself, a king in his own domain. The sight of such effortless superiority finally broke through Shigaraki's blank confusion, igniting the familiar, hateful rage of his former self. Grave? He shrieked, his voice a raw, unholy sound. I am eternal. I am the end. I will decay this entire pathetic world, starting with you. He lashed out, his hands firing a torrent of stolen quirks, air cannons, laser beams, kinetic blasts. It was a chaotic, indiscriminate barrage aimed at the sky, the sea, and the boy who floated in the center of it all. Naruto didn't even bother to dodge. The crimson chakra cloak swirled around him, forming spectral tails that contemptuously swatted the attacks aside like pesky insects. He's panicking, Kurama's voice rumbled in Naruto's mind. He's a child throwing a tantrum. He has no control in this environment. End it. That's the plan, Naruto replied, his red, slitted eyes narrowing. He shot forward, a crimson blur against the blue sky. Shigaraki, seeing him approach, did the only thing he knew how to do. He reached out with both hands, his decay quirk activating, aiming to unmake the very air between them. But Naruto was prepared. He made a single hand sign. Kaju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. 100 crimson-cloaked clones appeared in the sky around him, a silent, disciplined army. They didn't all charge. They moved with tactical precision. Half of them shot downward, running across the surface of the ocean as if it were solid ground. They began to run in a massive, circular pattern, their chakra-infused feet churning the water. The ocean began to move. A massive, swirling whirlpool, a mile in diameter, formed on the surface of the sea, its vortex aimed directly below the falling Shigaraki. The other 50 clones attacked. They swarmed Shigaraki from all sides, a whirlwind of red. They didn't try to land a decisive blow. They were a distraction, a storm of fists and chakra claws that forced Shigaraki onto the defensive, his decay quirk lashing out wildly, turning clone after clone into dust, but never hitting the original. Shigaraki roared in frustration, a wave of pure, destructive force erupting from his body, obliterating the remaining clones in a single, massive blast. But the diversion had served its purpose. While he was occupied, the original Naruto had dropped down to the surface of the ocean, landing in the calm eye of the massive whirlpool his clones had created. He held his hands out, and the very sea seemed to answer his call. A colossal, multi-tailed beast made of pure, swirling water rose from the depths, its form a mirror of the nine tails itself. High above, Shigaraki had finally regained his bearings. He used a stolen flight quirk to halt his descent, his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and disbelief as he looked down at the scene below. The boy was controlling the ocean. You are not a hero, Shigaraki hissed. You are a monster. Takes one to know one, Naruto's voice boomed, amplified by the water beast he now commanded. He stood atop its head, his arms crossed, a god of the sea staring down a god of decay. The water beast roared, a sound of 1,000 crashing waves, and lunged upward. Shigaraki met it with a wave of decay, but the water was not a solid thing. His quirk disintegrated the surface, but the sheer volume of the creature was too immense. A massive, watery claw slammed into him, sending him hurtling down toward the swirling vortex below. He crashed into the sea, and the whirlpool consumed him, pulling him down into the crushing, dark depths of the Pacific. For a moment, there was silence. The water beast dissipated, its purpose served. Naruto stood on the now calm surface of the ocean, his sage mode senses stretched out, searching the depths. Did you get him? Kurama asked. No, Naruto thought, his expression grim. Not yet. The ocean exploded. A pillar of gray dust and steam erupted from the surface, a sign that Shigaraki was decaying the very water around him, creating a pocket of air. He shot out of the sea, his body battered but his regeneration quirk already knitting him back together. His eyes were no longer empty. They were filled with a cold, calculating, and ancient hatred. It was the gaze of all for one. You are an interesting anomaly, Naruto Uzumaki, Shigaraki said, his voice now the calm, synthesized baritone of his master. But this game is over. He held out his hand. A swirling vortex of black and red energy, identical to the one All for One had used, formed in his palm. He had access to his master's full arsenal. Naruto met his gaze, the crimson cloak of the 9 tails flaring to life around him, 9 spectral tails whipping through the air. The time for tricks was over. He held out his own hand. A swirling sphere of black and crimson chakra, a perfect, dense-tailed beast bomb, spun to life. 2 gods, floating above an empty ocean, prepared to unleash the full, world-breaking fury of their power. The final battle had truly begun. The 2 attacks met over the churning, empty sea. It was not an explosion. It was a silent, violent erasure of reality. The tailed beast bomb, a perfect sphere of life and death, collided with the chaotic, multi-quirk blast from Shigaraki. For a single, blinding moment, a sun was born in the middle of the Pacific, a sphere of pure, incandescent energy that turned the sky white and boiled the ocean's surface for miles in every direction. The shockwave, when it came, was a physical thing, a hammer blow that flattened the waves and sent a hurricane-force wind screaming across the globe. Back in Japan, 1,000 miles away, the heroes fighting at the Gunga mountain villa felt it. A sudden, violent tremor in the earth, a flicker of impossible light on the horizon. They paused in their desperate battle, a primal, instinctual fear gripping them as they felt the distant echo of a battle between gods. In the center of the cataclysm, Naruto held his ground. The 9 crimson tails of his chakra cloak whipped around him, forming a protective sphere, a bastion against the storm he had unleashed. Shigaraki was not so fortunate. He had met Naruto's attack with the full, borrowed power of his master, but his body, this new, perfected vessel, was not yet accustomed to such a strain. The raw, untamed energy of the tailed beast bomb tore through his chaotic blast. It didn't just overpower him, it unmade his attack and consumed him. He was engulfed in the white-hot core of the explosion, his regeneration quirk fighting a desperate, losing battle against an energy that destroyed on a cellular level. When the light finally faded, the sky was scorched. A massive, hemispherical dome of steam hung over the ocean, the only evidence of the cataclysm. Naruto floated in the center of it all, his crimson cloak flickering, his breathing heavy. The attack had taken a massive toll on his chakra reserves. Did that do it? Kurama's voice was a low, tired rumble in his mind. Naruto's sage mode senses swept the area. He felt a flicker. A weak, but stubborn, spark of life deep beneath the waves. No, Naruto thought, his expression grim. He's still alive. A figure, mangled and broken, shot up from the sea, propelled by a stolen quirk. It was Shigaraki. Or what was left of him. His left arm was gone, his torso a mangled ruin of exposed bone and muscle. But as Naruto watched, the flesh began to writhe and stitch itself back together. The regeneration quirk was monstrously powerful. Is that all you have? Shigaraki rasped, his voice a distorted, gurgling sound. I'm just getting started. His body was a wreck, but he was grinning, a wide, unhinged rictus of pure, nihilistic joy. The vessel is breaking, Kurama observed, his voice sharp. He's regenerating, but the body can't handle the strain. He's a glass cannon firing nukes. Don't give him another chance to fire. Naruto didn't need to be told. This wasn't a fight to be drawn out. It was a threat to be neutralized. Now. He vanished. Before Shigaraki's grin could even fade, Naruto was there, a silent flash of crimson light appearing directly in front of him. He didn't bother with another tailed beast bomb. He didn't need one. His hand, cloaked in the bubbling red chakra of the 9 tails, shot forward. Shigaraki, in a desperate, instinctual move, met the attack with his own hand, his decay quirk flaring to life. The 2 palms met. For a fraction of a second, there was a stalemate. The power of unmaking ground against the chakra of a demon god. But Naruto's attack wasn't a simple strike. The moment they made contact, a complex, swirling array of black fuinjutsu characters erupted from his palm, flowing like ink across Shigaraki's skin. It was the five-element seal. An ancient, powerful jutsu designed not to destroy, but to disrupt. To create chaos in an enemy's power system. Shigaraki's eyes went wide as he felt his connection to his quirks, to All for One's vast library, to his own decay, suddenly sputter and short-circuit. The flow of power became a chaotic, agonizing flood he couldn't control. His regeneration went into overdrive, trying to heal a wound that wasn't physical, his own body beginning to tear itself apart from the inside. He let out a choked, gurgling scream as Naruto's other hand, holding a simple, standard Rasengan, slammed into his chest. The impact was absolute. The Rasengan's grinding, concussive force, combined with the internal chaos of the seal, was too much for the unstable vessel. Shigaraki's body didn't just fly backward, it crumpled, the bones in his chest and back shattering as he was launched like a ragdoll into the sea below. Naruto didn't wait to see him hit the water. He was already moving, a crimson blur dropping toward the ocean's surface. He snatched the unconscious, broken form of Tomura Shigaraki from the air just before he hit the waves. The battle was over. The god had been broken and caged. Naruto, his chakra cloak receding, floated above the now calm ocean, holding the unconscious form of his enemy. He was exhausted, his chakra reserves almost completely drained. But he was victorious. He took a deep breath, looked up at the empty sky, and with a final, weary thought, activated the Hiraishin seal he had left on Mirko's kunai. His world dissolved into a swirl of space and time, leaving the empty ocean behind. The war was over. Now, he just had to go home. The return was as jarring as the departure. One moment, Naruto was in the empty sky of the Pacific, the next, he was standing in the war-torn lobby of Jaku General Hospital. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of ozone. The sounds of battle still raged in the floors above. The heroes and villains fighting in the lobby froze in unison. They stared at the boy who had vanished, who had now returned as if from nowhere. He was no longer wreathed in crimson energy. He looked exhausted, his white flak jacket torn and singed. And slung over his shoulder, unconscious and utterly broken, was the man who had declared himself the leader of the new world, Tomura Shigaraki. Naruto walked through the frozen battlefield, his steps heavy. He walked past a stunned Endeavor, past a bleeding but still fighting Mirko, and gently deposited Shigaraki's body at the feet of a group of terrified police officers. "He's all yours," Naruto said, his voice a low, tired rasp. "His quirks are unstable. I'd recommend a reinforced cell. And a muzzle." He then looked up, his gaze finding Mirko's. Her face was a mask of shock, relief, and a dozen other emotions. He gave her a small, weary smile. "I'm back," he said. "Did I miss anything?" Mirko stared, her mind a blank slate of shock. The boy who had vanished in a flash of light, the boy she had been fiercely, desperately worried about, was back. And he had brought the boogeyman with him, broken and gift-trapped. Her shock lasted for exactly 1.5 seconds before her instincts took over. She moved, a black and white blur, appearing at Naruto's side. She didn't hug him. She didn't ask if he was okay. She punched him squarely in the arm, hard enough to send a shockwave through the floor. "You absolute, reckless, suicidal idiot," she roared, her voice a mixture of pure, undiluted rage and profound relief. She grabbed the front of his torn flak jacket, her grip like iron. "You disappear for 10 minutes, fight a god in another dimension, and then you just walk back in here like you were getting a coffee? What the hell is wrong with you?" Naruto just swayed on his feet, a tired, lopsided grin on his face. "I won," he rasped, his body finally succumbing to the immense chakra exhaustion. Her anger vanished as quickly as it had come, replaced by a fierce, protective concern. She saw the deep, bone-deep weariness in his eyes, the way his body trembled with the aftershocks of the battle. She tightened her grip, not to shake him, but to hold him up. "Yeah," she said, her voice softening to a low, rough murmur. "Yeah, you did, pretty boy." The sight of their leader, Tomura Shigaraki, lying broken and defeated at the feet of a single, exhausted teenager, shattered the morale of the remaining Paranormal Liberation Front soldiers. The fight went out of them, replaced by a primal, instinctual terror. This wasn't a hero. This was a monster who had just devoured their god. Some dropped their weapons and surrendered on the spot. Others turned to flee, only to be met by a wall of incandescent flame as Endeavor, his mind finally rebooting from the sheer shock of it all, unleashed his fury. "No one escapes," he bellowed, his voice the roar of a volcano. The cleanup was swift and brutal. The war for Jaku General Hospital was over. Just as the last of the villains were being rounded up, a frantic, static-filled voice crackled over the HeroComms network. It was Edgeshot, From the Gunga mountain front. Endeavor. We're being overwhelmed. The executives. There. Wait. A pause, filled with the distant sounds of battle. Something's happening. The enemy line is breaking. There. They're running. A new voice, belonging to the pro-hero Fat Gum, cut in. It's a full-scale rout. We just got a report. A message is spreading through their ranks. Shigaraki has been defeated. The number one hero. He took him down. It's over. A stunned silence fell over the heroes in the Jaku lobby. They looked from the comms unit to the boy who was now leaning heavily on the number 5 hero, his eyes half closed. He hadn't just won a battle. He had single-handedly ended a war that was being fought on 2 fronts, 100 miles apart, with a single, decisive act. The full weight of what he had accomplished, of the sheer, world-breaking scale of his power, settled over them. Endeavor stared, his own flame sputtering for a moment, the ambition of a lifetime turning to ash in his mouth. He had spent his entire life trying to become the strongest. But the very concept of strongest had just been rendered utterly meaningless. Naruto felt his consciousness begin to fray at the edges. The combination of Sage Mode, the Nine Tails Cloak, and a cross-dimensional Hiraishin jump had pushed his body to its absolute limit. Whoa there, easy, Mirko's voice was a firm anchor in the swirling darkness. She wrapped an arm around his waist, taking his full weight. Don't you dare pass out on me now. The paperwork is going to be a nightmare. He just chuckled, a weak, tired sound. You can handle it, he murmured, his head slumping against her shoulder. You're the main event. And then, for the first time in this new life, Naruto Uzumaki allowed himself to rest. He collapsed, not onto a cold, hard floor, but into the steady, protective embrace of his partner, his friend, his anchor in a world he had just saved. The war was over. And the number one hero was coming home. Naruto's world didn't just go dark, it dissolved. The last thing he felt was the solid, steady strength of Mirko's arm around him, a single, unshakable point in a universe that was rapidly spinning out of control. The roar of battle, the smell of smoke, the bone-deep ache of chakra exhaustion, it all faded into a peaceful, welcome silence. Mirko caught him, her powerful frame easily taking his full weight. For a moment, she just stood there in the ruined lobby, holding the unconscious form of the number one hero, the boy who had just saved the world. The adrenaline of the fight was draining away, leaving behind a profound, trembling exhaustion and a fierce, terrifying protectiveness. Endeavor was the first to approach, his flames extinguished, his face a mask of grim disbelief. He looked at the unconscious Shigaraki, now being loaded onto a reinforced transport by a team of specialized officers, then at Naruto. Is he? He's breathing, Mirko cut him off, her voice a low, dangerous growl that dared him to ask another stupid question. He's just tired. The official aftermath was a blur. The HPSC, in a state of unprecedented panic, locked down the entire city. A media blackout, absolute and immediate, was enforced. The official story, released within the hour, was a masterpiece of political spin. The Paranormal Liberation Front had been decisively crushed by a coordinated hero operation. Tomura Shigaraki had been apprehended. The nation was safe. But in an age of global communication, you can't put a lid on an apocalypse. The seismic sensors of a dozen nations had registered the cataclysmic energy release over the Pacific. Weather satellites had captured the image of a hurricane being born and dying in the space of a few minutes. And every hero on the front lines had a story to tell. The internet, predictably, became the true battlefield. HeroNet news ticker, nationwide media blackout following Jaku incident. HPSC claims total victory. But what are they hiding? Trending on Chirper, hashtag Jaku war hashtag the Pacific Light hashtag where is Shinobi? At QuirkWatcher24, forget the official story. My cousin is a seismologist in California. He says they registered an energy event off the coast of Japan that was bigger than a nuke. It happened at the exact same time the PLF forces started surrendering. Coincidence? I think not. Hashtag the Pacific Light. At Combat Analyst 99, let's connect the dots. 1. Shinobi and Shigaraki disappear from Jaku. 2. A world-breaking energy event occurs in the middle of the ocean. 3. Shinobi reappears with a defeated Shigaraki. This wasn't a fight. It was an execution. He didn't beat him, he took him out to the middle of nowhere and erased him. Hashtag Jaku, war. At Gossip Girl, I'm hearing from sources inside the HPSC that Mirko carried him out of the hospital herself. And she hasn't left his side since. Forget the war, the real story is the romance. Hashtag Narumi hashtag power, couple. The world was a wildfire of speculation, fear, and awe. The HPSC's attempt to control the narrative had failed spectacularly. They had tried to sell a story about a team of heroes winning a war, but the world knew the truth: a single boy had ended it. Naruto woke up to the steady, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. The room was white, sterile, and smelled of antiseptic. He was in a hospital. But it wasn't the noise that had woken him. It was the feeling of a hand, calloused and strong, holding his. He turned his head. Rumi Usajiyama was asleep in a chair beside his bed, her head slumped forward, her white hair a messy halo around her face. She was still in her tattered hero costume, her face smudged with dirt and dried blood. And she was holding his hand. He lay there for a long moment, just watching her. He could feel the deep, rhythmic pulse of her life force, a steady, powerful thrum that was more comforting than any medicine. He gently squeezed her hand. Her red eyes snapped open instantly, the instincts of a predator never truly asleep. She looked around the room, disoriented, before her gaze landed on him. The hard, feral edge in her eyes softened, replaced by a wave of pure, undiluted relief. "Hey, pretty boy," she said, her voice a low, raspy murmur. "Welcome back to the land of the living." "How long was I out?" he asked, his own voice hoarse. 3 days, she replied, stretching with a groan. "The doctors said your bioenergy readings just fell off a cliff. Went from impossibly high to clinically dead in a second. They'd never seen anything like it. Said you just needed to recharge." She smirked. "I told them to plug you into the wall." He chuckled, the sound weak but genuine. "Did you stay here the whole time?" She looked away, a faint, almost imperceptible blush on her dark cheeks. "Someone had to make sure the nurses didn't try to steal your DNA," she grumbled. "You're a hot commodity." Before he could reply, the door to the room opened, and a skeletal, worried-looking Toshinori Yagi stepped inside, followed by a grim-faced Aizawa. "He's awake," Aizawa stated, his tired eyes showing a flicker of relief. "Young Uzumaki," Yagi said, his voice thick with emotion. You did it. You saved us all." "Just doing my job," Naruto rasped. "No," Aizawa cut in, his voice sharp. "You did more than your job. You broke every rule. You ignored every protocol. And you single-handedly prevented a catastrophe that would have cost thousands of lives." He looked at Naruto, a new, profound respect in his eyes. "The HPSC is terrified of you. The world is calling you a god. And your classmates. They're waiting for you to come home." He was no longer just a student or a hero. He was something else entirely. A symbol, not of peace, but of a power so absolute it defied comprehension. And in a world that was reeling from the brink of destruction, they didn't know whether to worship him or fear him. The correction hung in the air, a small but crucial detail in a world that had been completely upended. Aizawa's tired eyes held Naruto's for a moment, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. "You're right," Aizawa conceded, his voice a low grumble. "You're not one of them anymore. Not a student," he sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "But they still see you as one of their own. The kids from 1A. They're waiting for you to get back on your feet." "I'll be there," Naruto said, a quiet promise. He wasn't their classmate, but he was their protector. That hadn't changed. Yagi and Aizawa left soon after, leaving Naruto alone with Mirko. The silence in the room was different now, charged with an unspoken intimacy. He was still holding her hand. Neither of them made a move to let go. "So," Mirko said, breaking the silence, her voice a low purr. "A god, huh? That's what they're calling you." She squeezed his hand, her thumb gently tracing a line over his knuckles. "Gonna let it go to your head, pretty boy?" "I've been called worse," he replied, a small, tired smile on his face. He looked at their joined hands, then at her. "You know, for a girl who communicates mostly by kicking things, you're surprisingly good at this." "At what?" she asked, her eyebrow raised. "This," he said, gesturing vaguely between them. "The quiet part." A slow, genuine smile spread across her face, a rare, unguarded expression that made her look younger, softer. "Yeah, well," she said, her voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur. "You do weird things to me, Uzumaki." She leaned forward, her face close to his, her red eyes searching his. "That kiss," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Before the fight. Was that just a soldier's farewell?" "No," he replied, his own voice just as quiet. "It was a promise." She held his gaze for a long moment, and then her smile returned, this time with its familiar, fiery, challenging edge. "Good," she said. "Because you still owe me a proper date. And this time, we're finishing it." Naruto's recovery was miraculously fast. The doctors, baffled by his body's ability to regenerate its own energy, discharged him 2 days later. As he walked out of the hospital in a fresh change of clothes, he was met not by a UA bus, but by Mirko, leaning against a sleek, black motorcycle, a spare helmet in her hand. "Your chariot awaits, Your Majesty," she said with a mock bow. "I thought you hated paperwork," he said, taking the helmet. "Don't you have a mountain of it to deal with?" "I delegated," she replied with a feral grin. "Let the sidekicks I don't have handle it. Get on." He didn't go back to UA, he didn't have a room there anymore. He went home with her. Her penthouse, once a training ground, became a sanctuary. A place where the number 1 and number 5 heroes could simply be Naruto and Rumi. The weeks that followed were a strange, fragile peace. The world was healing. The HPSC, true to Mirko's prediction, was in full spin mode. Endeavor was everywhere, his face on every screen, the official victor of the Jaku War. He took down villain cells, gave stoic, confident interviews, and became the symbol of strength the government so desperately needed. Naruto, meanwhile, vanished from the public eye. He was a ghost, a myth. The world knew he was out there, but his absence was as powerful as his presence. It created a new kind of deterrent, the fear of the unknown. Villains who might have grown bold in the new era were paralyzed by the knowledge that the boy who had teleported the world's most dangerous villain to the middle of the ocean could be anywhere, watching. His days were a quiet routine. He would spend the mornings with Eri at UA, her laughter slowly but surely returning as he taught her games and told her stories. His afternoons were spent with Mirko, a whirlwind of high-speed patrols that were more like exhilarating races across the city skyline. And the nights? The nights were theirs. They would sit on the balcony of her penthouse, high above the world, sharing takeout and quiet conversations. The playful, fiery energy was still there, but it was now tempered by a deep, easy intimacy. They were two warriors who had found in each other a rare, quiet peace. It was on one of these nights, a month after the war, that the peace was shattered. They were watching a movie, a stupid action flick that Mirko loved, when a high-priority alert flashed across the bottom of the screen. Hero alert, level a threat. Tartarus prison transport en route to Hasu General Hospital has been attacked. Heroes requested. Tartarus transport? Mirko said, instantly on her feet. They don't move those prisoners unless it's a major medical emergency. Who's on that transport? Naruto was already pulling on his flak jacket, his expression grim. He knew. There was only one prisoner in Tartarus who would require the kind of specialized medical equipment found at a major hospital, the kind of care needed to keep a broken, shattered body alive. The one who started it all, Naruto said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. A new alert, this one a frantic, panicked update, flashed on the screen. Update, prisoner identified. All for one. Transport has been breached. I repeat, all for one is free. The movie in the background was still playing, the sounds of fake explosions and cheesy one-liners a jarring contrast to the cold, hard reality that had just slammed into their lives. Mirko looked at Naruto, her face a mask of grim, feral determination. So much for the quiet life, huh? The hero's work is never done, he replied, a Hiraishin kunai already in his hand. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Let's go. In a yellow flash, they were gone, leaving the empty penthouse and the flickering television behind. The greatest evil the world had ever known was free. And the age of peace was officially, and violently, over. Chapter 8. The world resolved from a yellow flash into a scene of absolute chaos. One moment, they were in the quiet intimacy of Mirko's penthouse, the next, they were standing in the middle of a war zone on a highway overpass in Hasu. The massive, armored transport vehicle from Tartarus was ripped open like a tin can. Wreckage and bodies, guards and villains alike, were strewn across the asphalt. A handful of pro-heroes, the ones who had been assigned to the escort, were down, either unconscious or struggling with grievous injuries. And in the center of it all, standing atop the ruined transport, was a figure wreathed in a dark, oppressive aura. He was a nightmare of life support tubes and tailored suits, his face a scarred, featureless mask. All for one was free. But he was not whole. His body was a wreck, the same broken form Naruto had defeated in Kamino, and he was leaning heavily on a subordinate for support. He was weak, vulnerable. Well, Mirko growled, her body already coiling into a fighting stance, her red eyes blazing with a feral light. Look what the cat dragged in. He's uglier in person. All for one's head tilted, his unseen gaze locking onto them. He didn't seem surprised. He seemed expectant. The rabbit hero, Mirko, his voice, a synthesized, chilling baritone, echoed in the night. And the anomaly? Naruto Uzumaki. How? Predictable. He raised a hand, and the ground around the downed heroes began to churn. 3 monstrous, hulking figures erupted from the asphalt. They were Nomus, not the high-end models from the lab, but powerful, brutish creatures nonetheless. I am not yet at my full strength, All for One stated, his tone almost conversational. And I have a schedule to keep. My children will keep you occupied. The Nomus let out a synchronized, ear-splitting screech and charged. I'll take the ugly ones, Mirko roared, a bloodthirsty grin on her face as she shot forward to meet them, a one-woman wrecking crew. You get the main prize. Naruto didn't hesitate. While Mirko engaged the Nomus in a brutal, ground-shaking brawl, he vanished in a yellow flash, appearing directly behind All for One, a Rasengan already spinning in his palm. But his target was gone. All for One had used a spatial quirk, teleporting himself and his subordinate 100 meters down the highway in an instant. He was running. You cannot defeat me with a simple trick, boy, All for One's voice echoed back. I have 1,000 quirks for every one of your little surprises. The chase was on. Naruto shot down the highway, a silent, focused blur. All for One, despite his weakened state, was preternaturally slippery. He would warp short distances, use concussive blasts to create obstacles, and even sacrifice his own fleeing convicts, using their bodies as shields to slow Naruto's pursuit. This wasn't a battle. It was a strategic retreat. Naruto cornered him in a deserted industrial district, the two of them facing each other across a yard of shipping containers. You are not of this world, All for One stated, not as a question, but as a fact. He had seen the Rasengan. He had felt the impossible nature of the Hiraishin. That power you wield. It is not a quirk. It is something else. Something pure. He let out a low, rattling chuckle. How wonderful. After all these years. A new game. The game ends tonight, Naruto said, his voice cold. He entered Sage mode, the orange pigmentation flaring around his eyes. Does it? All for One countered. He raised his hand, and a swirling vortex of black and red energy formed in his palm. It was the same attack that had nearly killed All Might. But before he could unleash it, he did something unexpected. He turned the attack on the ground beneath him. The entire industrial park erupted. Shipping containers were thrown into the air like toys. The ground buckled and shattered. It was a massive, chaotic, and perfectly executed diversion. When the dust began to settle, All for One was gone. He had slipped away into the city's labyrinthine underbelly, a ghost in the shadows. Naruto stood in the center of the wreckage, his Sage mode senses stretched out, but the trail was cold. All for One's presence had been completely erased. He heard a thud behind him. Mirko landed, her hero costume torn, her body covered in cuts and bruises, but her eyes were blazing with the thrill of victory. The ugly ones are taken care of, she panted. Where's the boss? Naruto just looked at the empty space where the world's greatest evil had been standing. He's gone, he said, his voice a low, grim murmur. They had won the battle, but the real war had just been lost. The king was free. And the world was about to burn. So that's it? Mirko growled, her voice cutting through the heavy silence of the ruined industrial park. She landed with a thud, her boots crunching on shattered concrete, and slammed a fist into a bent shipping container, the metal groaning in protest. The boogeyman comes out to play, trashes the place, and then just runs off into the night? We just let him go? Naruto stood motionless, the orange pigmentation around his eyes fading as he released his Sage mode. The trail was cold. We didn't let him do anything, he corrected, his voice a blade of ice. He turned to her, his expression grim, the easy confidence replaced by the cold, hard focus of a commander. This wasn't a fight. It was a message. He's showing us he can get out whenever he wants. He's showing us he's in control. He made a single, sharp hand sign. Haju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. 1,000 shadow clones appeared in a silent, instantaneous explosion of smoke, flooding the entire industrial park. They stood in perfect, disciplined ranks, a silent army waiting for its orders. Mirko stared, her own anger momentarily forgotten in the face of such an overwhelming display. He's a ghost, Naruto said to his army. So we're going to become the ghost hunters. His voice rang with absolute authority. Spread out. Every city. Every town. I want eyes on every street corner, every back alley, every shadow in this country. The HPSC's intelligence network is compromised. Ours will not be. He turned his gaze to a specific group of 100 clones. Tartarus, he commanded. The prison is in chaos. A mass breakout is imminent. Your job is containment. You are not to engage All for One. You are to support the prison guards, identify all high-level escapees, and track them. Do not lose them. Go. The clones vanished, 1,000 whispers in the wind, a silent, nationwide deployment that was over before the first police car had even arrived on the scene. And what do we do? Mirko asked, her voice a low growl. She was a weapon of mass destruction, and he had just sent his army to do reconnaissance. We do our job, Naruto replied, his gaze sweeping toward the burning city. He unleashed chaos. We restore order. He looked at her, a silent challenge in his eyes. Race you? A feral, bloodthirsty grin finally returned to her face. You're on, pretty boy. They shot off into the night, two blurs of motion leaving the wreckage behind. They had lost the king, but the board was still full of pawns, and the game was far from over. The days that followed were a descent into chaos. All for One's escape was the crack in the dam, and the Tartarus breakout was the flood. The country was inundated with thousands of powerful, dangerous villains, all released at once. The hero system, already strained after the Jakku War, began to buckle. Cities became war zones. The HPSC was in a state of complete paralysis. Their authority had evaporated overnight. In the vacuum, a new authority emerged. It wasn't a committee or a government. It was the voice of Naruto Uzumaki, relayed through his clones to every hero agency and police precinct in the country. A clone would appear in Endeavor's command center. A group of Tartarus escapees are attempting to take over the national power grid. Your firepower is required at the Kanto substation. Now. Another would appear before a beleaguered team of underground heroes. The villain dictator is trying to start a riot in the Shibuya ward. His quirk is mass incitement. Do not engage him directly. Focus on crowd control. I will handle him. Naruto was everywhere at once. He was a one-man army, a perfect intelligence network, and a flawless command structure all rolled into one. He was the only thing holding the country together. He became a ghost, a legend whispered among the terrified populace. They wouldn't see him for days, and then, a news helicopter would catch a grainy image of a figure in a white flak jacket single-handedly stopping a prison riot or evacuating a collapsing building. He was saving the world, but the cost was immense. He never slept. He never rested. The original Naruto spent his days in a deep, meditative trance in Mirko's penthouse, his mind a nexus point for the thousands of clones spread across the country, processing a constant, overwhelming stream of information. Mirko became his guardian, his anchor. She would return to the penthouse after a brutal, 20-hour patrol to find him motionless, the strain of his constant vigilance visible on his face. She would sit with him, a silent, protective presence, her fiery energy a comforting warmth against the cold, hard weight of the world he was carrying. It was during one of these quiet moments that a clone's memory, sharp and urgent, cut through his trance. It was a report from a clone he had stationed near UA High. Izuku Midoriya has left UA, the clone's thoughts relayed. He's with All Might. They're going on the run. He's trying to draw All for One out, to protect the others. Naruto's eyes snapped open. He looked at Mirko, his expression grim. What is it? She asked, instantly alert. My friend, Naruto said, his voice a low, dangerous growl, is being an idiot. The words hung in the air of the quiet penthouse, a low, dangerous sound that shattered the meditative calm Naruto had maintained for days. Mirko was instantly on alert, her hand going to the kunai strapped to her thigh. An attack? She asked, her voice sharp. Worse, Naruto shot back, already on his feet, his eyes glowing with a faint, cold light as he processed 1,000 clone reports at once. It's a hero. He didn't need to search. He didn't need to track. He already knew where Izuku was. A dozen clones had been tailing him since he'd set foot outside the UA barrier. He placed a hand on Mirko's shoulder. Come on. We're going to have a talk with my friend. In a yellow flash, the penthouse was empty. They reappeared on a rain-slicked rooftop in a different city, the air thick with the smell of wet asphalt and urban decay. Below them, in a darkened alley, a battle was raging. A figure, ragged and worn, moved like a green blur, his costume torn, his body wreathed in the dark lightning of One for All. Izuku. He was fighting a group of escaped Tartarus convicts, his movements fast, powerful, but desperate. Watching from the mouth of the alley was the skeletal, haunted figure of Toshinori Yagi. Naruto and Mirko landed silently at the end of the alley, their arrival unnoticed in the chaos of the fight. So that's the plan, Mirko murmured, her voice a low growl of disapproval. The kid acts as bait, and All Might plays lookout. It's a suicide mission. Izuku dispatched the last of the villains with a powerful, leg-based smash that shattered the pavement. He stood there, panting, his body trembling with exhaustion. He looked less like a hero and more like a hunted animal. "You're getting sloppy, Izuku," Naruto's voice cut through the rain-filled silence. Izuku and Yagi spun around, their eyes wide with shock. "Naruto-kun? Mirko-san?" Izuku stammered. "What are you doing here?" "Saving you from yourself," Naruto replied, walking slowly toward them, his expression a mask of cold disappointment. Mirko followed, her arms crossed, her presence an intimidating wall of silent judgment. "You need to go," Yagi said, stepping in front of Izuku protectively. "All for One is hunting him. It's not safe." "You think I don't know that?" Naruto shot back, his voice sharp enough to make the former number one flinch. "I've had 1,000 clones tracking every move All for One has made since he escaped. I know where he is, I know who he's talking to, and I know what he had for breakfast this morning." He stopped a few feet from them, his gaze pinning them both. "This little road trip of yours? It's not a brilliant strategic move. It's a liability. You're not drawing him out. You're just a noisy, predictable target that's getting in the way of my real work." The words were brutal, clinical, and they stripped away every ounce of heroic nobility from Izuku's plan, leaving only the foolish, suicidal reality. I have to do this," Izuku argued, his voice trembling. "He's after me. If I stay at UA, he'll attack the school. I'm protecting everyone." "Protecting them?" Naruto's voice was dangerously quiet. "By leading the most dangerous villain in the world on a cross-country tour of every city with a civilian population? You're not protecting anyone. You're endangering everyone. You're not a shield, Izuku. You're a beacon for every monster in this country." He then turned his cold, hard gaze on Yagi. "And you," he said, his voice dripping with a disappointment that was worse than any anger. "You're letting him do it. You, who should know better than anyone the cost of being a symbol. You're not mentoring him. You're grooming a sacrifice." Yagi recoiled as if struck, the truth of the words hitting him with the force of a physical blow. "It's my fight," Izuku insisted, tears welling in his eyes. "One for all. It's my burden to carry." "No," Naruto said, his voice finally softening, the disappointment replaced by a firm, unshakable resolve. "It's our fight. It always has been." He took a step closer. "You're not alone in this, Izuku. You never were. Now stop being a martyr, and start being a partner. We have a war to win. And we're going to win it together." He held out his hand. It wasn't a request. It was a command. An offer of an alliance that had never truly been broken. As Izuku stared at Naruto's outstretched hand, a new sound cut through the night. It was a high-pitched, triumphant cackle, broadcast from every phone, every television screen, every speaker in the city. A new figure appeared on the screens. A man in a pinstripe suit and a top hat, Mr. Compress. But he wasn't alone. He stood before the shattered main gate of Tartarus prison. And behind him, walking out of the smoke and ruin, was a figure wreathed in a terrifying, familiar aura of decay. Tomura Shigaraki was free. "Hello, heroes," Mr. Compress's voice chirped. "Did you miss us? Our master was kind enough to leave a key. We thought we'd let everyone out to play." Naruto's eyes narrowed. All for One hadn't just escaped. He had left behind a parting gift. A king to keep the heroes occupied while he made his own move. "It seems," Naruto said, his gaze shifting from the screen to the horrified faces of his friends, "that the final battle has just arrived ahead of schedule." The triumphant, cackling face of Mr. Compress vanished from the screens, replaced by the panicked, frantic faces of news anchors. But no one in the rain-slicked alley was watching anymore. The world had just been turned upside down. Izuku stared at the spot where the broadcast had been, his face pale with a new, profound terror. "Shigaraki. He's free?" "He didn't just free Shigaraki," Yagi rasped, his skeletal frame trembling not with weakness, but with a deep, soul-shaking rage. "He freed them all. He opened the gates of hell." Mirko let out a string of creative, violent curses under her breath, her fists clenching and unclenching. The carefully constructed peace they had fought for, the fragile order they had maintained for the past month, had just been shattered. But Naruto was not looking at the screens. He was looking at Izuku, his hand still outstretched. The world had changed in an instant, but his offer, his command, remained. "The board has changed, Izuku," Naruto said, his voice a blade of ice that cut through their shock. "But the game is the same." He looked at his friend, his gaze unwavering. "Are you with me?" Izuku looked from Naruto's determined face to Yagi's horrified one. He saw the path he had been on, a lonely, self-destructive crusade, and he saw the one Naruto was offering. A partnership. A war fought together. He took a deep, shuddering breath and placed his hand in Naruto's. I'm with you, he said, his voice quiet but firm, the fear in his eyes replaced by a new, hard-won resolve. Good, Naruto said, his grip firm. He didn't waste another second. He was no longer a friend offering comfort, he was a commander on a live battlefield. He turned his gaze on Yagi. All Might. Get back to UA now. They're going to need a symbol to rally around when the panic hits. Keep them calm. Keep them focused. He then looked at Mirko. Go to the HPSC headquarters. They're in chaos. You're the only one they'll listen to who isn't a coward or a politician. Get me a direct line to every hero agency in the country. I want a nationwide emergency broadcast channel, and I want it 10 minutes ago. And what are you going to be doing? She asked, her red eyes blazing. I'm bringing my army home, he replied. He made a single hand sign. All across the country, 1,000 shadow clones, the ghost army that had been holding the nation together, received a single, silent command: fall back. Consolidate. The final battle is here. He then looked at Izuku. You're coming with me. Your little road trip is over. It's time to go to war. With that, he placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, and in a yellow flash, they were gone, leaving a stunned All Might and a grimly determined Mirko alone in the rain. The UA High that Naruto and Izuku returned to was a fortress on the verge of a siege. Alarms blared, and the school's massive defensive barriers were being raised. The students of Class 1A were gathered in the common room, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion as they watched the news reports of the mass breakout. The moment Naruto and Izuku appeared in the center of the room, a wave of relief washed over them. Midoriya. You're back, Kirishima yelled. What's going on, Uzumaki? Ida demanded. The teachers won't tell us anything. Naruto stood before them, his presence an instant anchor in the storm. What's going on, he said, his voice calm and absolute, is that the war has started. All for One and Shigaraki are free. And they're coming. He looked around at his former classmates, at the friends he had trained and fought alongside. UA is no longer a school. It is the last bastion of hope in this country. And you are no longer students. You are its last line of defense. He made another hand sign. 100 clones appeared, each one carrying a white flak jacket identical to his own. Put these on, he commanded. They're reinforced and equipped with emergency medical supplies and a Hiraition seal. From this moment on, you are not Class 1A. You are the UA Shinobi Corps. And I am your commander. There was no argument. There was no hesitation. They had seen his power. They had trusted his leadership. One by one, they took the jackets, a silent, solemn vow passing between them. It was at that moment that the emergency broadcast channel Mirko had established crackled to life on the common room's main screen. It wasn't a hero or a politician who appeared. It was a new, terrifying figure. All for One, his scarred face now visible, his body supported by a complex, throne-like life support system, looked out at the world. People of Japan, he began, his voice a calm, synthesized baritone. Your society has failed you. Your heroes have failed you. They offer you only chaos and fear. The screen split, showing a live feed of a revitalized Tomura Shigaraki, standing at the head of an army of escaped convicts, a terrifying grin on his face. We offer you a new world, All for One continued. A world of order. My order. He then looked directly into the camera, as if staring into Naruto's soul. But first, we must clear the board of the old pieces. We will start with UA High. The final challenge had been issued. The final battle was about to begin. Naruto stood before his newly formed army, his expression a mask of cold, hard resolve. The world was watching. And he would not let it fall. The screen showing All for One's face went black, but his final words hung in the air of the UA common room like a death sentence. We will start with UA High. For a moment, there was only the sound of ragged, terrified breathing. The students of Class 1A, now clad in the white flak jackets of Naruto's impromptu army, looked at each other, the true, world-ending scale of the fight ahead finally crashing down on them. Then, the ground shook. A deep, concussive boom echoed from the school's perimeter, followed by another, and another. The siege had begun. Report. Naruto's voice cut through the rising panic, sharp and absolute. A clone standing by the main window, its eyes closed, relayed the information. The outer walls have been breached. They're not using a subtle approach. It's a full frontal assault. An army of escaped convicts, led by the League of Villains Vanguard. And at their head, Shigaraki. He's the distraction, Naruto stated, his mind already 5 steps ahead. He's the battering ram meant to keep us occupied. All for One is the real objective. He turned to his newly formed Shinobi Corps. The fear was still on their faces, but beneath it was a new, hard-won resolve. "Listen up," he commanded, his voice ringing with an authority that left no room for doubt. "This is not a defensive battle. We are not here to survive. We are here to win." He pointed to Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki. "You three are Team Alpha. You will lead the main force. Your objective is Tomura Shigaraki. He is the head of their army. Cut him off. Isolate him. Do not let him touch the school grounds." Bakugo let out a wild, predatory grin. Finally, he growled. "A real fight. We won't let you down," Izuku said, his voice steady, his body already crackling with the green lightning of One for All. "The rest of you," Naruto continued, his gaze sweeping over the others, "will support Team Alpha. You are not to engage Shigaraki directly. Your job is crowd control. Dismantle their army. Protect the civilian shelters in the lower levels. Ida, you are the field commander. Coordinate their movements. Understood." Ida chopped the air, his fear replaced by a rigid, determined focus. "And what about you, Commander?" a new voice asked. Mirko strode into the common room, followed by Endeavor and a handful of the top pro heroes who had answered her call. She was already in her hero costume, her red eyes blazing with a fierce, joyous light. "Where are you going to be in all this?" "I'm going hunting," Naruto replied, his gaze distant as he focused on a single, malevolent energy signature he could feel approaching from the sky. "Shigaraki is a distraction. All for One is the king. And I'm going to checkmate him." He looked at Mirko, a silent, profound understanding passing between them. "Keep them alive," he said, a quiet command. "You just worry about yourself, pretty boy," she shot back, her grin widening. "Try not to win the war before the rest of us get to have some fun." A massive explosion rocked the building, closer this time. The battle was at their doorstep. "Go," Naruto roared. The UA Shinobi Corps, led by Team Alpha, charged out of the common room, a wave of determined, white-jacketed heroes moving as one. Naruto turned and walked toward the balcony, the wind whipping at his own flak jacket. He could feel him now, the dark, oppressive presence of his true opponent. He stepped onto the railing, looking up at the sky. A figure, supported by a throne of life support machinery and propelled by a dozen stolen quirks, descended toward the school. "So," Naruto said to the empty air, a slow, dangerous grin spreading across his face as he entered sage mode. "The old king comes to reclaim his castle." He leapt from the balcony, a golden blur shooting into the sky to meet the approaching evil. Below him, the final war for the fate of Japan had begun. The sky above UA High became the world's most terrifying stage. News helicopters swarmed the perimeter, their cameras broadcasting the impossible duel to a global audience of billions. In living rooms, in city squares, in refugee shelters across the country, the world watched, paralyzed with a mixture of terror and awe. "Unbelievable." A news anchor's voice screamed over the shaky, zoomed-in footage. "It's a battle in the sky. The number one hero, Shinobi, is engaged in a mid-air confrontation with the man they're calling the symbol of evil, All for One." Naruto, a golden meteor in his sage mode, met All for One's charge. The clash was not one of simple force, but of competing realities. All for One, with the cold, analytical mind of a master strategist, unleashed a symphony of stolen quirks. Rivets of hardened bone shot from his palms, only to be met and shattered by a swirling Rasengan. A wave of kinetic force, powerful enough to level a building, was effortlessly dissipated by a precise, chakra-infused gust of wind. "You are a fascinating creature," All for One's synthesized voice commented, his tone one of academic curiosity as he dodged a Hiraishin-assisted strike. "A powerhouse with no discernible quirk factor. A tactical mind that rivals my own. Tell me, from what forgotten corner of the world did you crawl?" "The corner that's about to bury you," Naruto shot back, creating a dozen clones in mid-air. They swarmed All for One, a coordinated, multi-pronged assault. While the gods battled in the sky, a war of mortals raged on the ground. The UA campus was a hellscape of explosions, ice, and the roar of 1,000 desperate fights. "They're breaking through on the west flank." Ida's voice, acting as the field commander, yelled over the comms. "We need support." "I'm on IT." A voice roared back. It was Kirishima, his body in its unbreakable form, standing as a lone shield against a tidal wave of rampaging villains. At the heart of the battle, Team Alpha was a force of nature. Todoroki would raise a colossal glacier, creating a choke point, and Bakugo would unleash a torrent of AP shots down the narrow path, decimating the enemy ranks. Izuku, a green blur of motion, would then shoot through the gaps, his shoot-style kicks taking out the stragglers with brutal efficiency. They were a perfect, terrifying engine of destruction, carving a path directly toward their target. Tomura Shigaraki stood in the center of the chaos, a calm, unholy eye in a hurricane of his own making. He watched the approaching trio, a wide, insane grin on his face. "So you're the new toys," he rasped. He placed a hand on the ground. A wave of gray decay erupted, not at the heroes, but at the very foundations of the UA barrier wall. The massive, multi-ton structure crumbled into dust, opening a massive breach in the school's defenses. "Oh, this is bad, this is very, very bad," a civilian watching the live feed from a shelter muttered, his hands trembling. "They're going to get in." The battle was being broadcast on every network, the split screen showing the duel in the sky and the war on the ground. The world was watching the fate of their society be decided in real time. Trending on Chirper, #UAFinalWar, #ShinobiVSafo, #Deku, Asamonster. At Combat Analyst 99, the teamwork from UA's Team Alpha is on a level I've never seen. They're not fighting as individuals, they're a single, multi-quirked weapon. But Shigaraki's power. It's not a quirk. It's a natural disaster. High above, Naruto felt the shift in the battle below. He saw the barrier fall. He knew he had to end this, now. He formed a massive, swirling Rasen shuriken in his hand, its high-pitched, shrieking sound tearing at the very air. "This is over, all for one." "Is it?" The villain replied, a new, chilling confidence in his voice. "I think not." He didn't attack. He simply held up a hand, and a new, bizarre quirk activated. It wasn't a blast or a shield. It was a wave of pure, psychic energy, a quirk that didn't target the body, but the mind. A quirk he called Mental Maze. Naruto's world dissolved. The sky, the school, the sounds of battle, it all vanished, replaced by a silent, white void. He was back in the place where he had first met Kami. But this was a cold, empty version. A prison. In the real world, the golden glow of Naruto's sage mode vanished. His eyes went blank. He stopped moving, hovering in the air, a motionless puppet with its strings cut. All for One let out a triumphant, rattling laugh. "You may have the power of a god, boy," he declared to the catatonic Naruto. "But I have the mind of a devil. Now, let's see what secrets are hiding inside that head of yours." On the ground, Mirko saw it. She saw Naruto's light go out. She saw him stop moving. A primal, terrified scream tore from her throat. Naruto. The world watched in horror as their greatest hero, their only hope, was defeated without a single, physical blow. The tide of the war had just turned. Mirko's scream was a raw, desperate sound that was lost in the roar of the battle. But her despair was shared by billions. On the live feed, the image was stark and terrifying. Naruto, the boy who had seemed untouchable, was now a motionless puppet, at the mercy of the monster who had just defeated him. Hope, for the first time, began to crumble. He's lost," a news anchor stammered, his voice trembling. "Shinobi has been defeated." On the battlefield, the heroes of the UA Shinobi Corps faltered. The sight of their commander, their anchor, being neutralized sent a wave of shock and fear through their ranks. "No," Izuku whispered, his own desperate fight against Shigaraki's forces momentarily forgotten. He can't lose." It was at that moment of absolute despair that something impossible happened. Izuku felt a surge of immense, ancient power from within. It wasn't the crackling green energy of One for All. It was something older, deeper. The vestiges, the spirits of the previous holders, were stirring. They had felt the world's hope flicker, and they had felt the presence of a kindred spirit, another vessel of immense, inherited power, in danger. They chose to act. The global broadcast signal, carried by 1,000 news helicopters, was hijacked. The shaky, terrifying footage of the battle was suddenly replaced by a series of strange, impossible images. The world saw a lonely, blonde-haired boy on a swing set, ostracized by an entire village. They saw that same boy, older now, standing before a crowd, his voice ringing with an unshakable promise, "I'm going to be Hokage." They saw him facing down a godlike being with orange hair, refusing to give up on his ideals even when pinned to the ground. They saw him standing before a vast, unified army of warriors from a dozen different lands, his presence the single, unifying beacon of hope in a world at war. They didn't understand the context. What was a Hokage? Who were these strange, powerful people? But they understood the story. It was a story of a boy who had been hated, who had been alone, but who had never, ever given up. A boy who had carried the weight of a monster inside him and had turned that curse into a source of strength. A boy who had become a symbol, not of peace, but of pure, unadulterated willpower. In her penthouse, Naruto's mother, Yashima, watched the screen, tears streaming down her face. Arashi, she whispered to her husband. That's his life. On the battlefield, Mirko stared at the sky, her own fight forgotten. She saw the pain, the loneliness, the impossible burdens he had carried. The cocky, infuriating boy she knew was a mask, a shield forged over a lifetime of struggle she could have never imagined. The fierce, protective feeling in her chest intensified into something sharp and painful. Inside the white void of the mental maze, All for One was rifling through Naruto's memories, his initial triumph turning to confusion. He saw strange techniques, felt an energy that was not a quirk, and saw a history that made no sense. What is this? What are you? He demanded of the catatonic Naruto. He's the one who's going to kick your ass, a deep, rumbling voice echoed in the void, a sound of pure, demonic power that made even All for One's ancient soul flinch. A colossal, nine-tailed fox made of crimson energy appeared behind Naruto, its eyes blazing with malevolent intelligence. And you are trespassing in our mind. At that exact moment, the wave of hope and understanding from the billions watching the broadcast, a psychic energy born of a shared story, slammed into the mental maze. It was a light that All for One's darkness could not withstand. The white prison shattered. In the real world, Naruto's eyes snapped open. The golden glow of Sage Mode returned, but it was different now. It was infused with a swirling, crimson energy, a perfect fusion of his own power and Kurama's. Sorry about that, he said, his voice a calm, confident echo across the sky. Had to take care of some trash in my head. He looked down at the battlefield. Just as he reawakened, the sky began to fill with new figures. Pro-heroes from all over Japan, their agencies having been overrun, had seen the broadcast. They had seen the truth of their number one hero. And they had come. The small, desperate defense of UA had just become the final, unified stand of Japan's entire hero society. Naruto looked at the shocked, terrified face of All for One. He then looked at the army of heroes rising to meet the challenge. A slow, confident grin spread across his face. All right, All for One, he declared, his voice booming with a newfound power. Round 2. All for One stared, his ancient, calculating mind reeling from the psychic backlash. He had been inside the boy's mind, seen the impossible memories, and had been met by a demon of pure, unimaginable power. He had been ejected, not by a quirk, but by a force of will so immense it had shattered his mental prison. What? What are you? All for One breathed, his synthesized voice laced with a new, unfamiliar emotion, fear. Naruto hovered in the sky, his body wreathed in a perfect, symbiotic fusion of golden Sage Mode energy and the bubbling, crimson cloak of Kurama's chakra. His eyes were a brilliant, cross-slitted orange, a perfect blend of the sage and the beast. He's just a thief, Kit, Kurama's voice rumbled in his mind, a sound of ancient, predatory glee. A collector of trinkets. Show him what real power looks like. Gladly, Naruto murmured, a wide, foxy grin spreading across his face. He held up a hand. A swirling sphere of golden and crimson energy, a tailed beast bomb Rasen Shuriken, spun to life, it sounded deafening, reality-tearing shriek. Round 2, Naruto declared, his voice booming with the combined might of two beings. While the gods in the sky prepared for their final clash, the war on the ground had been transformed. The arrival of pro-heroes from across the country was a tidal wave of hope that crashed against the villainous army. For Shinobi, a hero with a rhino quirk roared, plowing through a line of convicts. For UA, the students of the Shinobi Corps, who had been fighting a desperate, losing battle, were suddenly reinforced. They found themselves fighting side by side with the very heroes they had looked up to their entire lives. Keep pushing. Endeavor's voice boomed, his flames a raging inferno that incinerated a dozen villains at once. Drive them back. Mirko, her body a battered canvas of cuts and bruises, fought with a renewed, joyful ferocity. She looked up at the sky, at the golden, nine-tailed figure that was Naruto, and a proud, possessive grin stretched across her face. That's my damn idiot, she cackled, before delivering a devastating axe kick that shattered the ground and sent a group of villains flying. High above, All for One saw his advantage, his entire strategy, crumbling to dust. His army was being routed. His mental attack had failed. And the boy in front of him was radiating a power that dwarfed anything he had ever encountered. He made his choice. He abandoned the fight, turning to flee. Oh no, you don't, Naruto's voice echoed. He didn't throw the Rasen Shuriken. He appeared directly in All for One's path, a silent flash of yellow light. He held the shrieking sphere of power in his hand, its destructive energy inches from the villain's face. It's over, Naruto said, his voice calm. All for One, for the first time in centuries, knew true, absolute defeat. He was outmatched, outmaneuvered, and utterly, completely beaten. Naruto thrust the tailed beast bomb Rasen Shuriken forward. The attack consumed All for One, not in a fiery explosion, but in a silent, grinding vortex of golden and crimson light. The symbol of evil, the secret king of Japan's underworld, was not just defeated. He was unmade, his stolen quirks and his ancient body obliterated on a cellular level, erased from existence. The world watched, silent and awestruck, as the dark, oppressive presence that had hung over their society for a century was snuffed out like a candle. Naruto floated in the sky, the golden cloak of his new power slowly receding. He had won. But the war was not over. As the heroes on the ground began to cheer, a new, terrifying sound cut through the air. It was a low, rumbling wave of gray decay, erupting from the center of the battlefield. Tomura Shigaraki, who had been toying with Team Alpha, had seen his master fall. And the sight had not broken him. It had unleashed him. "Master!" He rasped, his voice a low, insane giggle. "He's gone." He looked at his own hands, at the power of decay and All for One that now resided solely in him. "It's all mine." He unleashed a wave of decay so massive it dwarfed anything he had shown before, a tidal wave of destruction that threatened to consume the entire UA campus. Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki met it with their own combined attack, a desperate, final stand. But it wasn't enough. They were being pushed back, their own power being unmade by the sheer, overwhelming force of Shigaraki's will. The cheering of the heroes turned to screams of terror. They had defeated the king, only to be faced with a new, even more powerful god of destruction. But then, a new figure appeared, landing silently between the struggling heroes and the wave of decay. It was Naruto. He held up a single hand, and a massive, golden, nine-tailed avatar of pure chakra, a Susanoo-sized Kurama, erupted around him, its sheer presence halting the wave of destruction. Naruto stood within the head of the golden beast, looking down at the shocked face of Tomura Shigaraki. "All right, Shigaraki," he said, his voice booming with the power of a god, broadcast to the entire, watching world. "You wanted my attention? You've got it." The world held its breath. The image broadcast on every screen was one of stark, biblical power, a colossal, nine-tailed beast made of golden light, standing as a final, absolute shield between a wave of utter annihilation and the last bastion of hope. Tomura Shigaraki stared, his insane grin faltering for the first time. The raw, overwhelming power of the golden avatar was a physical pressure, a force of pure life and will that was the antithesis of his own decaying nature. The all-for-one persona within him, the ancient, calculating intellect, screamed a single, silent command: destroy it. "So," Shigaraki rasped, his voice a low, hateful sound that was now layered with the synthesized baritone of his master. "You are a monster after all. I'm whatever I need to be to stop you." Naruto's voice boomed from the golden avatar, a sound of 1,000 voices speaking as one. The final battle began. It was not a duel. It was a clash of concepts. Shigaraki, the god of unmaking, unleashed a torrent of decay, not just at Naruto, but at the very ground beneath him, attempting to sink the entire school into a chasm of dust. The golden Kurama avatar responded. It didn't just block. It acted. Massive, golden chakra arms plunged into the earth, reinforcing the crumbling foundations, holding the school together through sheer, indomitable will. Colossal tails swept across the battlefield, not to crush, but to shield, intercepting blasts of stolen quirks aimed at the beleaguered heroes on the ground. He's saving us." A pro-hero yelled, his voice cracking with emotion as a golden tail materialized above him, absorbing a blast that would have vaporized his entire squad. On the ground, the tide had turned. Inspired by the impossible sight in the sky, the heroes fought with a renewed, desperate ferocity. Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki, freed from the pressure of facing Shigaraki alone, became a whirlwind of destruction, tearing through the ranks of the villain army. "Deku! On your left!" Bakugo's voice roared, a massive explosion clearing a path for Izuku to deliver a devastating smash to a high-level Nomu. They were no longer rivals. They were a single, perfectly coordinated weapon. Mirko, her body a canvas of bloody wounds, laughed, a wild, joyous sound. She looked up at the golden god in the sky, at the boy she had kissed as a soldier's farewell, and felt a surge of fierce, possessive pride. "Show em hell, Naruto!" she screamed, before launching herself back into the fray. Shigaraki grew more and more desperate. He couldn't break the avatar. He couldn't get past its defenses. He was a god of destruction, but his opponent was a god of protection. It was a fundamental, galling contradiction. In a final, desperate gambit, he gathered all his power, the full, terrifying might of a perfected all for one and his own decay quirk, into a single, massive sphere of gray, chaotic energy. It was an attack designed to unmake everything. If I can't have this world, he shrieked, his voice a chorus of madness and despair, then no one can. He launched the sphere of anti-life at the golden avatar. Naruto, from within his construct, met his gaze. He didn't counter with a tailed beast bomb. He didn't try to overpower it. He simply brought the avatar's 9 tails forward, wrapping them around the UA campus, around his friends, around the thousands of civilians sheltered within. He formed a perfect, golden sphere of his own. A shield. The world went white. The sphere of decay struck the golden shield, and for a moment, there was only a silent, all-consuming light. The live feeds cut out. The world was blind. When the light faded, and the cameras refocused, the scene was one of stark, unbelievable devastation. A massive, perfectly hemispherical crater now surrounded the UA campus. Everything beyond the school's original perimeter was simply gone. But the school itself, and everyone in it, was untouched. They were safe, nestled within the protective, now flickering embrace of the golden avatar. Naruto had taken the full force of the attack. He had chosen to shield, not to strike. He had saved everyone. The golden avatar began to fade, its chakra finally exhausted. It dissolved into particles of light, revealing Naruto, floating in the center, his own power receding, his body trembling with the immense strain. Shigaraki stared, his body cracking and breaking under the strain of his final attack, his regeneration quirk finally failing. He had unleashed his ultimate move. He had failed. He had been defeated, not by a greater power, but by a greater will. He let out a final, silent scream of pure, impotent rage before his eyes rolled back and he fell, his body turning to dust as the unstable quirks within him consumed his broken vessel. The war was over. Naruto slowly drifted to the ground, his feet touching the scarred earth of the campus. He was met by a wave of silent, awestruck heroes. They parted for him as he walked, their expressions a mixture of reverence and pure, undiluted awe. He walked past Endeavor. He walked past a tearful Izuku. He walked until he reached her. Mirko stood there, her body battered, her costume in tatters, but her red eyes were shining. He stopped in front of her, a small, exhausted smile on his face. "I'm back," he said, his voice a quiet rasp. She didn't speak. She just closed the distance between them and kissed him, a deep, bruising, and desperate kiss in the center of a silent battlefield, broadcast to the entire, watching world. The cheering, when it came, was a deafening, global roar. They had not just won a war. They had witnessed the birth of a new legend. Interlude, the world's questions. 1 week later, the world was still healing, but the chaos had been replaced by a new, fragile sense of order. At the center of that order was a single, unavoidable question, a question that echoed in every news report and every conversation. Who is Naruto Uzumaki? The newly formed Hero Coalition, a body of heroes elected to replace the disgraced HPSC, called a global press conference. It was held in a massive, rebuilt auditorium in Hasu City. The world's media was there, a sea of cameras and microphones. On the stage sat the new faces of Hero Society, Endeavor, his expression grim and humbled, Hawks, his usual smirk replaced by a quiet professionalism, and a young man with green hair and a fire in his eyes, Izuku Midoriya. At the center of the panel, flanked by a fiercely protective Mirko, sat Naruto. The first question, from a prominent international reporter, was the one on everyone's mind. "Uzumaki-san," she began, her voice respectful. "During the final battle, the world saw visions. A life. A history that is not of this world. We must ask. Who are you? Where did you come from?" The room fell silent. Naruto leaned forward, his voice calm and clear, broadcast to billions. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki. And I am not from this world." A wave of shocked gasps went through the auditorium. "I was the leader of a village in a world that was destroyed by a war, much like the one you just experienced," he continued, his voice steady and honest. "When I died in that world, a being you might call a god gave me a second chance. A chance to live here, and to help protect this world from the same fate as my own. The visions you saw. That was my life. That was my promise." Another reporter shot to his feet. "Your power. The golden beast, the teleportation. It's clear to everyone that it is not a quirk. What is it?" "It is called chakra," Naruto explained. "It is the life force energy that existed in my world. It is not a quirk. It is not something you can be born with or have taken away. It is a part of me, and the techniques I use, my jutsu, are skills I have learned over 2 lifetimes. The revelations were world-shattering. He wasn't just a boy with a powerful quirk. He was a refugee from another world, a reincarnated warrior king. The mystery was replaced by a truth that was even more unbelievable. Finally, a reporter from a gossip network, sensing an opening, turned to Mirko. Mirko-san. The world saw the kiss. What is the official nature of your relationship with the shinobi? Mirko's feral grin, which had been absent for the entire conference, finally returned. She leaned into her microphone, her red eyes sparkling with mischief. He's my partner, she said, her voice a low purr. She then looked at Naruto, a silent, challenging dare in her eyes. Naruto met her gaze, and a small, genuine smile touched his lips. He leaned into his own microphone. In every sense of the word, he confirmed. The room erupted in a flurry of camera flashes and shouted questions. Naruto held up a hand, and the room fell silent once more. I have one final statement, he said. He stood up, a silent, absolute authority radiating from him. The world has changed. The old system of rankings has failed. But a world without symbols is a world without hope. I will remain as the #1 hero. I will be this world's shinobi, its ultimate shield against the threats that hide in the darkness. He then turned and placed a hand on Izuku Midoriya's shoulder. Izuku, who had fought with every ounce of his being, who had inspired countless heroes and civilians with his unwavering courage, looked up at his friend. But a shield is nothing without a heart, Naruto declared, his voice booming with pride. Strength is meaningless without compassion. This world needs more than just a protector. It needs an inspiration. He looked out at the cameras, at the entire watching world. Izuku Midoriya, the hero Deku, is the heart of this new generation. He is the one who will run into the fire when everyone else runs away. He is the one who will save you with a smile. He is not the #1. He is something more important. He is your symbol of peace. He had not given away his rank. He had defined it. And in doing so, he had given his friend a title that was truly, completely earned. The world had its shield. And now, it had its heart. The press conference was a declaration, not just of Naruto's origins, but of a new era. He had laid his cards on the table, and the world, surprisingly, had accepted them. The mystery of the shinobi was replaced by the legend of the reincarnated hero, a story so outlandish, so mythic, that it was easier to believe than any lie. In the month that followed, the world began to heal. With the leadership of the newly formed Hero Coalition and the unwavering inspiration of Deku, Japan started to rebuild. The villains who had been freed in the Tartarus breakout were systematically hunted down and rearrested, many of them simply giving up when faced with a clone of the boy who had unmade all for one. A fragile, hard-won peace settled over the country. It was during this quiet period, on the familiar balcony of their penthouse, that Naruto made a decision. I'm bored, he announced to Rumi, who was in the middle of a brutal morning workout, doing one-armed handstand push-ups. She flipped onto her feet, not even breathing hard, a bead of sweat tracing a path down her temple. Bored? She asked, her eyebrow raised. The world almost ended a month ago. You're not allowed to be bored. The world is fine, he countered, gesturing to the peaceful city below. Deku and the others have it handled. The clones are keeping an eye on things. There's nothing to punch. And this is a problem for you because? Because, he said, a slow, adventurous grin spreading across his face, we've saved the world. Now I want to see it. He held up 2 tickets, procured by a clone moments before. They weren't for a train or a bus. They were for a first-class flight. I've never been outside of Japan. In either life. You and me. Let's go on a trip. Her own feral grin matched his. Where are we going, pretty boy? Everywhere, he replied. And so they did. Epilogue. For the next 6 months, they were ghosts, myths whispered on the wind. They left the protection of Japan in the capable hands of Deku and the new generation of heroes, and they simply traveled. Their first stop was a small, quiet village nestled in the Italian Alps. They spent a week doing nothing but eating pasta, drinking wine, and hiking through the mountains. You know, Rumi said, her mouth full of gnocchi as they sat at a small, family-owned restaurant. For a guy who can teleport, you sure do like to walk. It's about the journey, he replied, stealing a piece of bread from her plate. Not the destination. She kicked him under the table, but there was no heat in it. From there, they went to Cairo, where Naruto, much to Rumi's amusement, spent an entire day arguing with a camel that refused to let him ride it. They explored the bustling markets of Marrakesh, the ancient temples of Cambodia, and the vibrant, chaotic streets of Rio de Janeiro during Carnival. They were not heroes on a mission. They were just Naruto and Rumi. They would occasionally stop a petty crime, a purse snatching in Paris, a back alley mugging in New York, with an efficiency that was so swift and absolute it left the local heroes who arrived on the scene staring in baffled awe. But they never stayed for the credit. They would simply melt back into the crowd, two anonymous travelers in a world of wonders. It was in a quiet, moonlit lagoon in Thailand that something shifted between them. They had spent the day swimming, the warm, clear water a welcome balm. As they floated in the gentle current, surrounded by the soft glow of bioluminescent plankton, the playful banter and the easy camaraderie settled into a comfortable, profound silence. "You know," Rumi said, her voice a low murmur in the quiet of the night. "I've been a hero my whole life. It's all I've ever been. Fighting, winning. It was the only thing that made sense." She turned to him, her red eyes soft and vulnerable in the glowing water. I've never done this before." "Done what?" he asked, his voice just as quiet. "This," she said, gesturing to the peaceful lagoon, to the stars above. "The quiet part." She looked at him, a universe of unspoken emotion in her gaze. "It's not so bad." He didn't reply. He just reached out, his hand finding hers in the water. He intertwined his fingers with hers, a simple, silent gesture that was more intimate than any kiss. They stayed like that for a long time, two warriors who had spent their lives in the storm, finally finding a moment of peace in the calm, quiet center of their own small world. The journey was far from over, but they were no longer just partners. They were each other's home. Their journey eventually led them to the sun-drenched coast of California. This stop, however, was not a random pin on a map. "So," Naruto said as they sat in a convertible, cruising down the Pacific Coast Highway, the wind whipping through their hair. "You never told me your mom was a Hollywood movie star." Rumi groaned, sliding her sunglasses down her nose. "She's not just a star, pretty boy. She's a supernova of chaos. You think I'm a handful? You're about to meet the woman who taught me everything I know about causing trouble." Her mother, known to the world as the legendary action starlet Reina Vesta, had a personality as explosive as her on-screen pyrotechnics. The moment Rumi had called to say they were coming, Reina had taken to social media. At Reina Vesta official, verified, black check mark emoji, "Guess who's coming to visit mama? My little bunny at Mirko official is bringing her world-saving boyfriend to my Hollywood Hills villa. Clearing my schedule for some much-needed family chaos. LA, get ready to meet a real hero. Hashtag Shinobi in Hollywood hashtag Narumi." The post went viral in minutes. The American public, who had watched the war in Japan with a mixture of terror and rapt fascination, exploded with excitement. To them, Naruto was a living legend, the boy god who had battled a demon king in the sky and won. His arrival wasn't just a visit, it was an event. When they pulled up to Reina's sprawling, opulent villa in the Hollywood Hills, they were greeted by a scene of controlled chaos. News helicopters hovered overhead, and a crowd of fans and reporters was held back by a line of beleaguered-looking private security. The moment they stepped out of the car, a woman who was the spitting image of an older, even more confident Rumi burst from the front door. She had the same white hair, the same powerful build, and the same feral, joyous grin. "There's my baby girl." Reina Vesta boomed, enveloping Rumi in a bone-crushing hug. She then turned her megawatt smile on Naruto, her eyes scanning him from head to toe with an appreciative, analytical gaze. "And you must be the one. The boy who finally managed to put a leash on my wild rabbit." "Mom." Rumi groaned, her cheeks flushing. "It's a pleasure to meet you, ma'am," Naruto said with a calm, easy smile, completely unfazed. "Oh, I like this one," Reina cackled, clapping him on the shoulder. "He's got nerve." The next few days were a whirlwind. Reina Vesta, in her infinite capacity for chaos, had arranged a welcome party that was less of a party and more of a national summit. The guests included Hollywood's biggest stars, powerful studio executives, and, most notably, the top brass of America's hero agencies. Naruto found himself shaking hands with a tall, impossibly muscular woman with star-spangled hair and a presence that radiated pure, unadulterated power. "Kathleen Bate," she said, her voice a powerful, confident boom. "The world knows me as Star and Stripe. It's an honor to meet you, Shinobi. What you did in Japan. You saved us all from a hell of a mess." "I just did my job," Naruto replied. "You did more than that," a man in a sharp suit, the head of the country's largest hero agency, cut in. "You changed the game. Which is why we'd like to make you an offer." He gestured to the glittering city below them. "Stay. Both of you. We could build an entire agency around you. The resources, the support. You'd be the biggest heroes in the world. Bigger than All Might ever was." Another man, a slick Hollywood producer, slid in. Forget hero work, kid. I'm talking movies. A multi-picture deal. The Shinobi story. Will make you a bigger star than Reina. You've got the look, the power, the backstory. You're a billion-dollar franchise waiting to happen. Naruto just listened, a small, amused smile on his face, as they offered him the world on a silver platter. He looked over at Rumi, who was currently arm wrestling a famous action star and winning, a wild, joyous laugh on her face. He saw her mother, Reina, holding court, telling an exaggerated story about one of Rumi's childhood tantrums that had apparently leveled a city block. He looked at the earnest, ambitious faces of the American heroes, at the greedy, excited faces of the producers. They were offering him power, fame, and fortune. They didn't understand. He'd already had all of that. And he'd given it all up for something much, much better. Naruto held up a hand, a simple, calming gesture that somehow cut through the cacophony of offers. The powerful heroes and the slick producers fell silent, their attention fixed on him. I appreciate the offers, Naruto said, his voice calm and steady, carrying easily across the glamorous party. And I'm honored that you would think of us. He looked at Star and Stripe, a genuine respect in his eyes. But we're not looking for a new agency. He then turned to the producer, his smile turning a little cheeky. And I think the world has had enough of my life story for one lifetime. He walked through the small crowd, making his way to Rumi, who had just slammed the action star's hand to the table in a decisive victory. He offered her a hand up. My place is in Japan, Naruto continued, his voice resonating with a quiet, unshakable conviction as he stood beside Rumi. With the new generation of heroes we're helping to build. And my partner, he said, looking at Rumi, a soft, genuine warmth in his eyes, is right here. The rejection was so simple, so devoid of arrogance or ambition, that it left the powerful men and women speechless. He wasn't turning them down for a better offer. He was turning them down because he was already exactly where he wanted to be. Later that night, after the last of the guests had departed, the three of them sat on the edge of Reina's infinity pool, their feet dangling in the cool water, the lights of Los Angeles a glittering carpet below them. You know, Reina said, breaking the comfortable silence as she took a sip of her champagne. I've seen a lot of people try to get close to my daughter. Ambitious sidekicks, arrogant rivals, corporate sponsors. They all wanted a piece of the Mirko brand. She turned her sharp, intelligent gaze on Naruto. You're the first one who doesn't seem to want anything from her at all. I've already got everything I want, Naruto replied simply, his hand finding Rumi's in the water. Reina watched them for a long moment, her usual boisterous energy replaced by a soft, maternal warmth. You're good for her, she said, a final, definitive statement of approval. She stood up, stretching. All right, you two lovebirds. I'm going to bed. Try not to break anything expensive. Or do. I've got insurance. With a final cackle, she was gone, leaving them alone in the quiet of the California night. So, Rumi said, nudging his shoulder with her own. You turned down being the king of Hollywood and the hero of America. For me? I turned it down for us, he corrected her gently. I was the leader of a whole village once. The Hokage. It was a heavy hat to wear. He looked at her, his expression open and honest. I spent my whole first life fighting for peace. For a world where people could be safe. Now that I have it, I just want to live in it. She leaned her head on his shoulder, a comfortable, easy gesture. The quiet part, she murmured. Yeah, he replied, his arm wrapping around her. The quiet part. They sat there for a long time, two warriors who had saved the world, finally content to just watch it turn, together. 8 years later. The automatic doors of the LAX arrivals terminal hissed open, and a wave of controlled chaos spilled out into the California sunshine. Wow! Yashima Uzumaki breathed, her blue eyes wide with a childlike wonder as she took in the sprawling, sun-drenched landscape. Arashi, look! The palm trees are even bigger than on the television. They're magnificent. Her husband boomed, his own wild blonde hair a stark contrast to the sleek, modern architecture of the airport. And the air. It smells so American. Behind them, a younger, though no less formidable, couple was attempting to wrangle the source of the chaos. Minato, don't you dare teleport to the baggage claim. Rumi Usajiyama, now Usajiyama Uzumaki, called out, her voice a familiar, dangerous purr that had lost none of its edge over the years. But Mom, it'd be faster. A 6-year-old boy with his father's blonde hair and his mother's fiery red eyes shot back, a Hiraishin kunai clutched in his hand. Kushina, stop trying to kick your brother's head off, Naruto said, his voice a calm, practiced anchor in the storm as he effortlessly caught the leg of a small girl with vibrant red hair and faint whisker marks. He started it. She retorted, her rabbit ears twitching in annoyance. It was a scene of pure, unadulterated family bedlam. Naruto and Rumi, the two most powerful heroes in the world, were being run ragged by their 6 children. "Alright, you little monsters, listen up," Rumi commanded, her pro-hero voice cutting through the noise. "Grandma Reina is waiting. The first one to the limo gets to pick the movie tonight." That was all it took. A blur of white, red, and blonde hair shot through the terminal, a tiny, adorable stampede that sent travelers scattering. 6 of them, Yashima-san, Arashi said to Naruto's mother, a look of profound, grandfatherly awe on his face. "I still can't believe it." "Well," Yashima said with a knowing smile, watching Rumi and Naruto chase after their brood. "When the doctor told them that Rumi's quirk might affect her fertility, I don't think anyone expected it to mean she'd have the reproductive capacity of an actual rabbit. Rumi had wanted 1 child. Maybe 2. But her first pregnancy had resulted in quadruplets, 2 boys and 2 girls, a perfect, chaotic mix of Uzumaki and Usagiyama genes. 2 years later, a second attempt had produced twins. Their quiet life had become a beautiful, noisy, and wonderfully unpredictable adventure. Naruto finally caught up to the last of his children, a small, quiet girl with his blue eyes and his wife's white hair, and scooped her into his arms. He looked over at Rumi, who was in the middle of a mock lecture with their oldest son. She caught his eye and rolled her own, a shared, silent communication of pure, exasperated love. He had spent 1 life fighting for peace. He had spent the beginning of his second life defending it. And now, surrounded by his loud, chaotic, and wonderful family, under the warm California sun, he was finally, truly living in it. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching.